Avengers Endgame was one of the most iconic films of all time, and not only iconic just in general, it was one of my favorite movies of all time. It was the perfect conclusion to over a decade of storytelling. Was it really that perfect though? Could it have gone better? What if things changed? What if the sacrifices, the battles, and even the snap itself had taken a different path? Today I have for you not just a small tweak to the movie, it is a genuine rewrite. A new version of Avengers Endgame that keeps everything that we love, all of the most iconic scenes, but takes it in ways that you would never expect. I didn't just change this movie just for the sake of changing it. Every choice I made here was to enhance the story, to make Thanos more terrifying, to give certain characters the moments they deserved, and to raise the emotional stakes to their absolute limit. If you lend me your time watching this video, which I really appreciate you already being here because your time is so valuable. Thank you very, very much, by the way. I promise you, I will at least open your mind to the possibilities that Endgame could have been a little bit better perhaps than it already was. And that's difficult to say because it was really a great movie. I want to keep all of your favorite moments, but I want to make the movie itself stronger. Apologies for the long intro. I hate long intros. Let's get into the rewrite in just 1 second. Before we do though, I do want to say hello everybody. Welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with too many YouTube channels. I'm going to get into the story right now and interrupting just a little bit throughout to kind of show you my thought process in writing some stuff. Let's get into it. The movie begins as usual, with no change. The events take place as they originally do. The Avengers regroup, shaken by the loss of the snap. They struggle with their failure, each dealing with their grief in their own way. As they learn of Thanos' location, the mission forms. With renewed purpose, they prepare to track him down, believing that by taking back the Infinity Stones is their only and last hope to undo the damage that was caused. Everything follows the same course up until now. They land on Thanos' planet, their nerves tight with anticipation. But when they arrive, Thanos isn't the same as the story told. Thanos is not beaten, not scarred, not hurt. Instead, he's thriving. He looks healthier than ever, calm, even content, tending to his garden in a scene that almost seems peaceful. There's no sign of the struggle shown in the original story. The Avengers ready themselves for one final battle. Their mission is clear: stop Thanos, take back the stones, and undo the snap. With a silent agreement, they launch their attack. And then, everything changes. Thanos moves with the terrifying speed and precision we saw in Infinity War. He easily overpowers them with all of the stones still in his gauntlet. Thor's axe is caught right away. Captain Marvel is sent flying to the sky. One by one, the mightiest heroes fall easily. In moments, they're scattered across the farm, broken and quickly defeated, staring up at the same being who caused so much devastation, who stands victorious once again. Thanos looks down at the fallen Avengers, confused. "I don't understand. I thought you'd be thriving by now," he says, his voice carrying a hint of surprise. He steps closer, his gaze shifting from one Avenger to the next. "I brought balance. I gave life to those lost in the shadows of overpopulation and hunger. I restored the universe." There's a genuine sense of confusion in his voice, as if he can't quite grasp why they are still fighting him. "You should be grateful. You have peace now. Balance. A universe that can be free of chaos," he continues, his tone almost fatherly, as if explaining something obvious. He pauses, letting his words sink in before shaking his head slightly. "And yet, here you are, still resisting," he adds with disappointment. Every Avenger remains silent, struggling to move. As Thanos' voice softens, "I've done my work. The stones, they're nothing to me now. My mission is complete. The peaceful life he has built for himself visible on the horizon. I've retired. I've found peace. This is my reward, and you dare interfere again." Turning back to face them, Thanos makes his offer. "Leave, go back to your world. Live with what I've given you and find peace in it. This is your last chance. Walk away now and never return." The Avengers exchange uncertain glances, the weight of his words heavy on them. They've been completely overpowered, and slowly, reluctantly, they begin to stand on their feet and collect themselves. For a brief moment, it seems like they will walk away, leaving Thanos behind in his solitude. But just as they turn to leave, Thanos raises a hand. "Wait." The Avengers freeze, unsure of what's coming next. Thanos steps forward slowly, his eyes locking onto Rhodey. The tension in the air is palpable as Thanos reaches out, grabbing Rhodey by the armor and pulling him forward. The others don't move, powerless to stop him. Thanos holds Rhodey there for a moment, letting the weight of what's about to happen sink in. "You didn't think you could leave without a payment, did you?" His voice is calm, almost gentle, but the menace in his words is unmistakable. Rhodey struggles for a brief moment, but suddenly, his bones snap. Thanos crushes him, and Rhodey collapses onto the ground, lifeless. The remaining Avengers stand in shocked silence as Thanos steps over Rhodey's body. "A payment must be made," Thanos says coldly. "Let this be a warning. If any of you return, you will share the same fate." The remaining Avengers, shaken and devastated, gather themselves, leaving Rhodey behind as they walk away in silence. Thanos watches them disappear in the distance, a grim satisfaction settling over him. I kind of wanted to change this whole scene around because I didn't like how Thanos just kind of got killed off. It didn't feel like we were fighting the same villain at the end, the one that was built over for a decade. We can still have the time heist, we can also, with that, keep the same villain. Thanos was such a great character, and I wouldn't want to sacrifice himself for some shock value, kind of like what we saw in Avengers Endgame. This would set up to have the same, angry Thanos that was shown in Endgame, because, of course, this story is far from over. The Avengers board their ship in silence, their hearts heavy with grief and shame. As the ship begins to slow its ascent from Thanos' planet, the mood is darker than ever. No one speaks. Thor stares out the window, watching the stars blur into streaks of light. His grip tightens on Stormbreaker, the blade resting on his lap. He was powerless. All of them were. His mind flashes back to Thanos' words, replaying them over and over as he failed yet again. Steve sits by Natasha, both their expressions blank, drained by the hope they once clung to. They had a plan. They thought they could fix everything. But now they're returning home not only without the stones, but with one of their own left behind. Dead. Steve, the unshakable leader, now feels the crushing weight of his own failure, unsure how to move forward. Rocket sits near the controls, unusually quiet. His normally sharp tongue is nowhere to be found, replaced instead by an empty stare. He's lost friends before, but this feels different. It feels deeper, like everything they've done was for absolutely nothing. The silence between them is louder than any words they could speak. There's nothing to say. They failed, and that failure weighs on each of them in different ways. The hum of the ship is the only sound that fills the air, a low, steady reminder of the long journey ahead. As Earth finally comes into view, the reality of what they're about to face begins to settle in. They left to save the universe, but they're coming back with nothing but loss. Now, something that I wanted to emphasize with this is I want them to sit on their failure and what just happened for a while, because I didn't really quite feel like at the beginning of Endgame that we did at the end of Infinity War. The loss really sinks in here, and I wanted the dread to be felt. The scene would be at least a few minutes, and I would have believed it would be very powerful if Endgame would have kind of been able to capture that same feeling that audiences had when they were leaving Infinity War. The movie continues as it originally does. After their devastating encounter with Thanos, the screen fades to black, and we jump 5 years into the future. We see a world that is still not recovered, one still dealing with the consequences of the snap. Steve leads a support group, Natasha clings to her work, and Tony is living a quiet life with his family. All of these moments happen as they did before, unchanged. But when we get to Scott Lang's return, this is where we'll focus on a powerful moment, his reunion with his daughter. As Scott emerges from the quantum realm, confused and disoriented, he stumbles into a world he no longer recognizes. He walks through the streets that are quiet, seeing missing persons written everywhere, the effects of the snap all around him. But what hits harder is when Scott finally arrives at his home. When the door opens, it's not a little girl who greets him, but a young woman, his daughter Cassie. Scott stands frozen, staring at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and relief. He's missed 5 years of her life. 5 years, gone in almost an instant. The scene lingers on with this emotional moment, much longer than originally shown. When they finally embrace, it's filled with all of the heartache and love of a father who had thought he lost everything. This scene was one of the most underrated moments in the entire movie, and I just wanted it dragged on more. I know it didn't really change anything, but as it was presented, I already wanted to tear up. Could you imagine if we let this linger on? I just wanted to emphasize that this would be a little bit longer than it was. The events again continue as they did in the original movie. Scott, after reuniting with his daughter, heads over to the Avengers compound. He's excited about the possibilities of the quantum realm, believing it holds the key possible to time travel and undoing the snap. He explains to the team how time works differently there and how he experienced only hours while the world had moved on by 5 years. Instead of attempting to use the quantum realm for time travel, the Avengers go straight to Tony Stark. Tony has the knowledge and technology they need, and while he's reluctant, the Avengers know that he's the only one who can figure out a solution. They approach Tony at his home, just as they did in the original film, and try to convince him to help. The story continues with Tony's reluctance to join in the fight. He's found peace with Pepper and Morgan. When the Avengers approach him, Tony's hesitant. He's built a life, one that he's not willing to risk. He turns them away, but the idea lingers in his mind just as it did. Later that night, as Tony was thinking more about it, he looks at a photo of Morgan. The future he wants for her becomes clear. Tony ends up making the same decision to help the Avengers. The next day, he arrives at Avengers HQ, ready to bring what he has to play. The Avengers gather the remaining team that survived the snap, all but one hero. Tony looks around, scanning the room. "Where's Rhodey?" he asks, his voice casual at first, expecting his friend to be right behind him like always. But there's no response. Tony's brow lowers. He looks around again, this time more intently. "Where's Rhodey?" he repeats, his tone now laced with concern. Steve and Natasha exchange a glance, their faces heavy with the weight of the truth. It's Natasha who steps forward, her voice quiet, filled with sadness. "Tony, we were waiting for the right time to tell you." The words hit Tony right away. He freezes, disbelief washing over him. What? What are you talking about?" His eyes dart between Steve and Natasha, searching for any sign that this isn't real. Steve takes a deep breath. "It was Thanos. When we went to his planet, he took Rhodey's life as a weird sort of payment." Tony's face falls. The pain, the guilt, it's all there. His mind reels, flashing back to all of the battles they fought together, all of the time they spent bonding, all of the times Rhodey had his back. For a long moment, Tony says nothing. The room is silent, everyone feeling the weight of the loss. Finally, Tony speaks, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Natasha, struggling to find the right words. "We didn't know how to. We thought you had enough on your plate with your family." Tony stares for a moment. The pain is clear in his eyes. "We'll discuss this when we return," he says, barely holding in tears, somehow keeping it together. The story continues as the heroes sit around their table, laying out the path they believe they can save the universe. Their idea is to travel back in time, collect the Infinity Stones from moments in the past, and use them to undo what Thanos has done, and match his power in the present day. Each of the Avengers will be assigned specific points in time where they know the stones were gathered. They suit up, determined and focused. The weight of Rhodey's death, their failures, and the fate of the universe push them forward. Everything proceeds as it did before. The Avengers travel back to 2012 New York, where the city is in chaos during the Battle of New York. Captain America, Tony, Ant-Man, and Hulk split up to retrieve the stones. While the others follow their original missions, Hulk heads to the Sanctum to retrieve the Time Stone from the Ancient One. When Hulk arrives, the Ancient One is already expecting him. As in the original, she's aware of his presence and knows about the Avengers' plans. However, when Bruce begins to speak, asking for the Time Stone, the Ancient One doesn't respond right away. Instead, she narrows her eyes, studying him intently. Something isn't right. "I don't trust you," she says, her voice calm but wary. Bruce tries to reason with her, continuing to explain why they need the stone to undo the devastation of the snap, but the Ancient One is unmoved. "Do you know who I am?" "You're not who you say you are," she replies, her gaze piercing through him. Then, with a swift and graceful motion, she raises her hand, and before Bruce can react, she pushes the soul out of his body. What's revealed to us is not Bruce Banner at all. It's Loki. The camera lingers on the stunned expression of Loki's disembodied soul as it floats above the Hulk's body, revealing the deception to the audience for the first time. The Ancient One just looks and says, "You may have fooled others, but not me." Loki, still caught in a soul projection, tries to smooth talk his way out of the situation with a smile, but it's too late. The Ancient One knows who she's dealing with. She doesn't trust him, and now she holds all the cards. After Tony's mission to retrieve the Space Stone fails, he's frustrated. He decides to regroup with the others to see how things are progressing, hoping that at least someone's had success. As he makes his way towards the Sanctum, where Hulk was supposed to retrieve the Time Stone, Tony spots something strange in the distance. He notices Hulk and the Ancient One standing together, but something feels off. Curious, Tony hangs back, ducking into an alleyway, watching the interaction from afar. Upon getting a better look, Tony mutters to himself. What the hell? Pulling out his communicator, about to warn the others, but he hesitates. He watches the Ancient One, calm and unfazed as she holds all the power over Loki, who's trapped in the projection of his soul. After a moment, Tony sighs. Of course, can't just have a normal mission without some Loki-level nonsense. Deciding it's time to step in, Tony walks out of the alleyway and approaches the two, catching Loki off guard. Well, if it isn't the god of I can't leave anything alone. What's the game this time, Loki? Huh? Loki smirks, still floating in his soul form. I was merely lending a hand. Yeah, right. I'm sure you had our best interests in mind, Tony shakes his head. Let's just cut it to the chase. How long and why have you been screwing with us? The Ancient One, sensing the tension, waves her hand and forces Loki back into his original form. He stands there, arms crossed, unbothered by the reveal. Tony stares him down for a moment, seemingly considering his options. You know what? I'm not even going to deal with this right now. He presses a button on his suit, and in an instant, Loki is sent back through the quantum portal. Tony lets out a deep breath and turns to the Ancient One. I'll deal with it later. I don't imagine we have a shot at getting that stone from you, right? The Ancient One nods. The Time Stone is already in good hands. Tony walks off knowing they need to find another way, frustrated that they still haven't acquired a stone. I personally thought that this would be an incredible way to solve the frustrations people had with the way that the Hulk turned out. I personally, throughout the entirety of Endgame and Infinity War, thought that the problem was that Hulk was actually Loki, because I've seen theories about that going around. It was like, that makes sense, that's why the Hulk won't come out, that's why he has that weird relationship with Bruce Banner. I thought that was actually going to take place, and I thought that would have been an incredible twist. So I thought, you know what, why not introduce it here? This would add some mystery. What's Loki doing? Where's the Hulk? All of those answers, we will have answers for you. The next scene would pretty much go as the original did, with the Mind Stone mission remaining a success. Captain America and Tony regroup, their relief tampered by the knowledge that they missed 2 of the 3 stones. Loki has escaped with the Tesseract, and the Time Stone is still with the Ancient One. They send Ant-Man back to the present with the Mind Stone to ensure at least one victory in this mission, but Cap and Tony make a decision to travel further back in time, to a moment they both remember, the 1970s. The two of them take a breath, aware that this trip will be a little bit more personal. With a silent nod, they prepare themselves for one last shot at retrieving the Space Stone. Arriving at a military base, they split up. Tony runs into his father, they have an emotional conversation. Meanwhile, Cap catches a glimpse of Peggy. With the Space Stone and Pym particles secured, they press their buttons and return to the present. Now for those 2 scenes, for this trip specifically, I didn't want to change a thing about it. I thought they were incredibly moving. I loved the conversation Tony had with his father, and Steve being reminded of his long-lost love. I thought they were presented almost perfectly, and I just wanted to leave them untouched. I love even watching them back to this day. It's beautiful. The story then takes us to Asgard in 2013, where Thor and Rocket go to retrieve the Reality Stone. This version is mostly unchanged, but here, Thor isn't overweight, but he is still struggling deeply with this sense of worthiness. As he prepares to face his past, his doubt is clear. He worries that he may no longer be worthy to wield his powers. Rocket tries to snap him out of it, reminding him that this mission isn't about him, it's about setting things right. Despite his uncertainty, Thor presses on. He has a heart-to-heart with his mother, he reaches for Mjolnir, and to his relief, it returns to his hand, confirming that he is still worthy. With renewed strength, Thor and Rocket still complete the mission, successfully retrieving the Reality Stone. Now, just like the scene that we did talk about, I didn't want to change much of this one. Like Tony's heart-to-heart with his father, I thought they presented the exchange with Thor and his mother almost perfectly. I loved how both of them took place, besides the idea of Thor being fat, of course, and don't take that the wrong way. I know people can take that and run about it talking about how you hate this and that. It just did not seem like the Thor that we've come to know. This Thor, I think they turned him into a joke. I think the writers absolutely destroyed Thor, and I didn't want him, I want him to be struggling with a sense of worthiness, but I don't want him to be a beer-addicted, out-of-shape, weird video game playing guy. The story continues on Morag, Nebula arriving alone this time. Her mission clear: retrieve the Power Stone and return it to seemingly complete the Avengers' plan. With War Machine gone, she has no backup, just the solitude of the alien landscape and the weight of her memories. Unlike the other missions, this one goes off without a hitch. She locates the Power Stone, following the steps that her past self perhaps once witnessed, and secures it. But as Nebula prepares to leave, she hesitates. This time, her sister Gamora still serves Thanos, loyal to his twisted mission. Nebula remembers the sister she fought alongside, the Gamora who ultimately turned against their father, choosing a path of mercy, justice, and love. A thought gnaws at Nebula. What if she could change Gamora's future right here, right now? What if she could save her sister from a life of loyalty to Thanos before the darkness ever took complete hold? Nebula's fingers tighten around the Power Stone. She knows what it cost Gamora to turn against Thanos. Her sister became a warrior with a heart, a friend, a true family member. But that only happened after years of pain, manipulation, and violence. If Nebula acted now, could she give Gamora a future free from Thanos' shadow? Her heart pulls in two directions. Their mission is still clear, but her desire to save her sister battles with her duty. After a long, silent pause, she decides to keep the thought close. The Power Stone in hand, she turns away. Her mind set, but her heart conflicted. She'll complete the mission today, but knows she wants to come back for her sister. Now, obviously, I had to change the scene because of the new fate of Rhodey. I wanted to open the door to still bringing the old Gamora back, but as the real Thanos is our antagonist in this story, I wanted to erase everything that kind of led to the other timelines Thanos entering the story. I've also heard complaints about how Nebula was hacked in this story, in the original story to Endgame. I just wanted to mention that I disagree with that. I thought that was honestly really, really good storytelling. I enjoyed how it all played out. I loved the fact that it actually ended up leading well into that Thanos in that timeline, in that story. But I did want the original Thanos to be the true villain in this story. I thought it was, I don't want to say incorrect. That's not what I want to say. I just thought it was a huge missed opportunity. It didn't feel like fighting the same Thanos. Fighting a different Thanos was a weird weight that was lifted off of us. The tension didn't feel nearly as much. The Vormir mission goes on as it did before. Black Widow and Hawkeye reach the cliff where they must make a sacrifice for the Soul Stone. The gut-wrenching scene still happens as both fight to be the one who gives their life for the other. Finally, Black Widow wins, letting go while they both hang on the cliff and falling to her fate. This scene plays out with the same intensity. Hawkeye left at the edge, devastated and broken. However, as the camera pulls back, we don't see Black Widow's body on the ground below. Instead, the screen fades to black, leaving only Hawkeye's cries echoing into the silence. I can't say much at this moment because right now this seems to be like an unnecessary change, but trust me, we will get into it. I loved the way this entire thing played out in the original script, and I wouldn't want to change anything about it. Seeing Black Widow's lifeless body on the ground was important, but for this specific rewrite, it must be cut, and again, you'll understand why in a moment. Let's continue. The Avengers return to HQ, their faces weary from the journey, but some carrying quiet hope. One by one, they step through the portal, each clutching their respective stones. Their expressions a mix of relief and sorrow. But the moment Loki steps through, the room falls as silent as it could possibly be. Eyes widen, and the variety of feelings ripple through the team as they realize who stands before them. Loki? Natasha says with her brows lowering. Tony, standing off to the side, watches with narrowed eyes, curious. But it's Thor who steps forward, his face contorted with a tangle of emotions. Disbelief, anger, and a haunt of something more. He watched his brother die, he had mourned him, carried the pain of that loss, and now, here Loki was, standing in the middle of Avengers HQ, alive as ever. Loki, Thor says, his voice low, dangerous. What twisted game is this? He takes a step closer, his hand tightening around the hammer, each knuckle white with his grip. I watched you die for real. He seethes, the words carrying a raw, broken edge. I mourned you again. Loki swallows, visibly haunting under Thor's gaze, the mischief absent from his eyes for once. Brother, listen. But Thor's face hardens, cutting him off. He raises the hammer slightly, as if ready to strike. No more lies, no more tricks, no more. Before he can finish, Loki raises a trembling hand, conjuring a shimmering portal beside him. Without a word, the unconscious Hulk trumbles through, slamming heavily onto the ground, and the team watches in stunned silence as the Hulk begins to shrink, reverting back to Bruce Banner, who lies still and passed out at Loki's feet. The Avengers are left speechless, eyes darting between Bruce and Loki, but Loki stays silent, his eyes steady, and it's Thor who breaks the quiet, stepping closer with slow strides. His voice is a low, wounded whisper. Why? Loki's usual facade cracks, his expression raw, stripped of the trickster's veneer. Thor, brother, Please, he says with his voice almost breaking. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to show you that I was still alive after all of my lies. He glances around the room, seeing skepticism, the anger, even the pain in their eyes. It was the only way to save myself, to save Bruce. Thanos. He stops to swallow hard. I didn't know if I would survive, but I knew you would. Thor's face remains stoic, his eyes glistening with a mix of betrayal and the faintest spark of hope. You left me to mourn you again, he says, his voice strained but still stoic. You will not play me again. Loki's gaze drops, his voice soft. I tried to save everyone, he says. I wanted to live, brother. I wanted us all to live. Thor's grip loosens slightly on the hammer. So you hid, he murmurs with a heavy tone. You hid, and you let me believe it again. Loki's shoulders sag, the desperation in his voice raw. I didn't know how else to do it. If I had come back as myself, would any of you trusted me? Would you seriously let me beside you? Thor doesn't answer, the words hanging heavy in the air. The rest of the Avengers watch, some still wary, others softening slightly as they see genuine pain in Loki's eyes. Loki takes a tentative step forward, his eyes locked on Thor. Please, brother, for once, I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for one final chance. I wanted to live. I wanted you to live. I thought this to be the only way. Thor's eyes linger on Loki, his anger still simmering, but tempted by the sliver of vulnerability he sees in his brother's face. Finally, he lowers his hammer, though his grip remains firm. I have lost you too many times, Loki, he whispers. You cannot toy with life like this. Loki nods, his voice nearly a whisper. I understand. I truly am sorry, brother. Thor, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the momentum, lets out a breath, glancing at the other Avengers. We'll speak of this later, he says, the tone of one both exhaustion and reluctant acceptance. The trust is not restored, but for now, the confrontation is over, and I will deal with it. The room is still tense, the air thick with unspoken words after Thor steps away from Loki, his emotions still raw. Tony breaks a short silence, his voice sharp with a hint of fatigue. All right, let's regroup. We've got stones in hand, so let's figure out where we are. He looks around the room. Roll call. Who's got what? Nebula steps forward first. The Power Stone's here. She places it on a small podium near the portal and steps back, looking at Loki for a moment. Tony taps a case holding the Space Zone. Tesseract's good, no thanks to the God of Trouble. Cap nods towards everyone. Mind Stone secure. Thor, still standing near Loki, adds quietly, the Aether is accounted for. But as the room falls silent, a realization creeps in. Tony frowns, scanning the group. Wait, where's Nat? All eyes shift to Clint, who's sitting apart from the group, staring at his hands, his head hung low, and it takes a moment before he can even look up. I don't have it, Clint says, his voice barely above a whisper. The room freezes. What do you mean you don't have it? Tony asks, stepping forward, his tone sharp with confusion. Clint shakes his head, his voice rising slightly. It didn't come to me. I thought after that it would just show up. After she... His voice cracks, and he looks away. After Nat... The weight of his words settles heavily over the room. Thor grips his hammer even tighter, his face falling as the realization sinks in. Tony exhales sharply, running a hand over his face. You're telling me we lost Nat, and we don't have the damn stone either? Clint looks up and screams, startling everyone. I don't know! I don't know how this works, okay? I thought it would just be there. Steve steps forward, his voice steady but strained. It was supposed to be a soul for a soul. She gave her life for it. Clint, we all trusted that. Clint's voice breaks. I thought I had it. I thought she was worth it, and now she's just gone. Thor's voice cuts through the heavy silence, his tone quiet but trembling with grief. Natasha, she was the best of us. And now, his voice trails off. Steve places a hand on Clint's shoulder, his eyes filled with pain. We can't change what happened, but we can still make it mean something. We can bring everyone back, including her. Clint shakes his head, his eyes brimming with tears. How do we even know that's possible? We don't even have the Soul Stone. What if everything was just one big lie? Steve looks back with a soft voice. She wouldn't want us to fall apart like this. She'd want us to finish the job. Tony, standing off to the side again, speaks, his voice quieter but firm. Look, we've faced impossible odds before. We've lost people before. But if there's a chance, if there's even the smallest chance we can get her back, we owe it to her and to everyone else to try our hardest, to avenge them. Thor grips his hammer again, straightening slightly. And then we finish this. For Natasha. Steve nods, his voice powerful and deep. For her. Tony exhales deeply, his mind turned back to practicalities. Alright, what about the time stone? Loki didn't get it, so what's our next move? Thor steps forward with a calm voice again. We go back to Asgard. Heimdall could guide us. Show us another way to retrieve it. Steve nods slowly. Let's make this count. For Natasha, and for everyone. Clint wipes his face, his voice still heavy but now stronger. For her. As you can probably tell, I do have an alternative route that I'd like to go with the stones, but I just didn't like how everyone initially dealt with Black Widow's death. Something was just off about the rage and throwing the bench. It felt like we just didn't really sit on it enough. Who knows though, perhaps this opens the idea for her return maybe. Thor, Tony, and Loki quickly head back into the portal, arriving and approaching the observatory at the end of the Bifrost Bridge. Heimdall stands at his post, happily looking into the infinite expanse of the cosmos. The massive golden sword rests at his side, ready to activate the Bifrost. As they step closer, Heimdall turns, his usual calm smile appearing as he sees Thor and Loki. Thor, Loki, good to see you both. Thor's breath catches as he sees his old friend alive, strong, and vigilant. He struggles to speak, his emotions tightening his chest. Heimdall, he says softly, his voice almost breaking with a strange smile doing his best to appear normal. Heimdall tilts his head slightly, picking up on Thor's unease. You seem troubled, my friend, more so than usual. Tony, sensing the tension, steps back to break the moment. Yeah, sorry to crash the Asgardian reunion, but we're kind of on the clock here. We need the time stone. Heimdall raises an eyebrow, looking between the three of them. The time stone is no longer in Asgard's possession. But, he pauses, turning to look outward towards the cosmos. There may yet be a way. Heimdall uses Hofun to open a shimmering portal. The ancients once entrusted its location to the Keepers of Time, hidden within a realm outside our own. I can guide you to the threshold, but beyond that, you must tread carefully. Thor nods. Thank you, Heimdall. It really is great to see you today. Heimdall looks at him for a long moment, his smile faint but warm. Go now, the realms need you. The portal shimmered behind them, fading into nothingness as Thor, Tony, and Loki found themselves in a dimension unlike anything they had ever seen. It was as if fabric of time itself had unraveled and rewoven, creating an endless expanse of shifting light and shadow. The air almost seemed alive, humming with a glow, resonant pulse that vibrated through their bones. Each step they took left faint ripples in the ground, as though the ground beneath them was an illusion. This place, Tony muttered, glancing around, his hands instinctively tightening on the device in his palm, feels like a bad acid trip. Thor remained silent, his grip on his hammer yet firm. He scanned the shimmering void with narrowed eyes, his instincts on edge. Loki, standing slightly apart from the others, observed the surroundings with a mix of curiosity and wariness, his green cloak trailing behind him. Before anyone could speak further, a voice boomed around them, deep and resonant, as though the very realm itself had spoken. Travelers, the voice spoke, calm yet commanding. You seek the power of time, but such power is not given freely. Time is a burden, a gift, and a responsibility. To wield it, you must prove your worth. The ground beneath their feet rippled violently, and before any of them could react, beams of light shot up from around each of them, forming barriers that separated them. The last thing Thor saw right before the light engulfed him was Loki's faint smirk faltering into something unreadable. Thor blinked, his breath catching as the light faded and the world around him shifted. He stood on the ruins of Asgard, the once majestic palace now crumbling into ash and rubble. The skies were gray, choked with smoke, and the Bifrost lay shattered at his feet, its faint glow flickering and fading like a dying ember. He turned slowly, his heart heavy, and froze when he saw a figure standing amidst the destruction. Odin, Thor whispered, his voice trembling. The figure stood tall, his form faint, but the presence unmistakable. Thor stepped forward instinctively, but something in his father's stern eyes stopped him. "You carry Mjolnir still," Odin said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "Yet your heart is uncertain. Tell me, Thor, do you believe yourself worthy of it?" Thor hesitated, gripping the hammer tighter as the torn memories surged through him. He saw Thanos overpowering him, failing to stop the snap, and the endless grief that followed. He saw Asgard burning, Heimdall's lifeless body falling before his eyes, and his mother's sacrifice. Doubts clawed at him with every image, each one sharper than the last. "I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice carrying emotion. "I failed so many times, I don't know if I deserve this anymore." Odin tilted his head slightly, his gaze softening. "Worthiness is not about perfection, my son. It is not the absence of failure. It is the strength to rise again, to face your fears and fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." He stepped closer, his figure forming into more of a human-like normal manner, placing a hand on Thor's shoulder. "You carry the weight of a king and the heart of a warrior. That is enough." Thor's hand trembled as he looked down at the hammer, the weapon that had defined so much of his life. The doubts still lingered, but Odin's words rang true. Slowly, Thor strengthened his shoulders and tightened his grip. "Then I will rise again," he said, his voice steadying, "for Asgard and for everyone that was lost." The vision faded, and Thor found himself back in the shimmering void, his chest still heavy, but his expression renewed. He finally began to look like his old self. Tony, meanwhile, found himself standing by a lakeside cabin. The sun glinted off the water, and laughter filled the air. Turning toward the porch, he saw Pepper and Morgan, their faces glowing with happiness as they played together. He froze, the ache in his chest overwhelming. For a few minutes, he could do nothing but watch them, his heart swelling with a bittersweet mixture of love and longing. "You've earned this," a voice said behind him, surprising Tony. Tony spun around to find himself leaning against the cabin's doorframe, or rather, a version of himself, calm and casual. The other Tony gestured to the scene before them. "Perfect, isn't it? No wars, no Avengers, no risk, no sleepless nights, no weight of the universe on your shoulders. Just this." Tony opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Memories began to surface, Peter Parker turning into dust, and at the same time Pepper's tear-streaked face as she begged him not to leave. The hollow feeling of watching everything he fought for slip away. The cabin was perfect, but the cracks were beginning to show. Their laughter seemed distant now, the air unnaturally still. Beyond the cabin, the world blurred into a lifeless void. "This isn't real," Tony said, his voice growing sharper. He turned to the other Tony, his jaw tightening. "What's the catch?" The doppelganger smiled faintly. "No catch, just a choice. Stay here, live your life with them, or go back and fight for a world that doesn't deserve you." Tony turned back to his family, his heart breaking all over again. But as much as he wanted to stay, he couldn't ignore the truth. This still wasn't real. He saw Morgan's face, her bright eyes full of wonder, and he knew her future, everyone's future, depended on his choice. "It's not about what I deserve," he said quietly. "It's about what they deserve." With a final glance at the cabin, he turned away. The vision dissolved, and Tony stood once more in the shifting void, his resolve solidified. Loki found himself seated on the golden throne of Asgard, the 9 realms bowing before him. It was everything he had ever desired, yet something felt wrong. The faces in the crowd were indistinct, their cheers almost lifeless. The throne felt cold beneath him, the weight of the crown heavy on his head. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" a voice said. Loki turned to see a spectral version of Thor standing beside him. His brother's expression was stern, almost accusing. "You wanted the throne, Loki. Now you have it. So why do you look so miserable?" Loki's hands tightened around the edges of the throne, his thoughts racing. He had fought his entire life for this moment, but now, sitting alone, it almost felt wrong. Images of his mother flashed before him, her warm smile replaced by the memory of her death. Thor's laughter echoed faintly, a reminder of the bond they once shared. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but power is meaningless without someone to share it with," Loki said quietly, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He stood from the throne, his expression hardening with resolve. "I can't believe I'm feeling this way, but I will fight for something more today. Perhaps I will one day be naturally worthy of this, but not at this moment." The vision quickly faded, and Loki returned to the void, his smirk faint, but his eyes tightened. The shimmering void around them settled, an ethereal hum fading into a low, resonant silence. Thor, Tony, and Loki stood together, their breaths uneven, and their faces marked by the weight of what they had just endured. Though none of them spoke, there was an unspoken understanding among them. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just the realm they stood in. The deep, resonant voice of the Guardian returned, its tone softer now, as though acknowledging their efforts. You have faced your truths and emerged as more than what you were. Time is not lightly given, nor lightly wielded, but today, you have proven yourselves worthy. Before them, the ground shimmered, and a pedestal began to rise, carrying the time stone atop it. The green glow of the stone pulsed gently, casting faint reflections across their faces. It was beautiful, impossibly so, and yet its presence carried a gravity that none of them could ignore. Thor was the first to step forward, his hands tightening around the hammer as he approached the pedestal. He paused, glancing back at Tony and Loki, searching for their approval. Tony gave a small nod, his face serious. Loki, standing a step behind, folded his arms but inclined his head ever so slightly. Taking a deep breath, Thor reached out and lifted for the stone. It felt warm in his hand, alive with energy that pulsed faintly among his palm. For a moment, he simply held it, staring into its depths, feeling the weight of what they had achieved. He didn't notice the way the realm began to tremble until Tony spoke. I hate to break up the moment, big guy, but this place looks like it's about to blow, Tony said, motioning towards the rippling edges of the realm, which were beginning to collapse inward. Thor turned sharply, clutching the stone tightly as he stepped back towards the other. The voice of the Guardian echoed once more, this time with an air of finality. Go now. Time is yours to protect. But remember, each moment you change ripples into countless others. Choose wisely. A portal opened behind them, golden light spilling into the collapsing void. Without hesitation, they moved toward it. Loki was the first to step through, his movements brisk but not rushed. Tony followed, sparing one last glance at the crumbling realm, his mind already spinning with the possibilities and dangers the time stone represented. Thor lingered for a moment, his eyes drawn to the space where the pedestal had stood. Thank you, he said softly, though he wasn't entirely sure to, or what, he was thanking. The portal closed behind them as they stepped into the Bifrost. The sudden shift setting in was almost jarring. The familiar rainbow bridge beneath their feet, a stark contrast to the surreal void they had just left. Heimdall stood at his post, his golden eyes scanning the trio as they approached. He raised an eyebrow at their expressions. You look as though you've been something far beyond the 9 realms, Heimdall said, his tone light but welcoming. Thor tried to respond, but his throat tightened. Seeing Heimdall alive and well, standing at his post as if nothing had changed, stirred an ache in his chest that he hadn't expected. He smiled, quickly walked up to his old friend, and gave him an embracing hug as Heimdall laughed. Loki, for once, was silent, his usual sharp remarks absent. Even Tony, normally too quick with a quip, simply gave a faint nod. Heimdall's eyes lingered on each of them for a moment longer before he turned back to the controls. Your path leads you home, he said. Good luck, my friends. A beam of light enveloped them, and in an instant, they were gone. They materialized back at Avengers HQ after using their original way home, the sudden stillness of the room jarring after the intensity of their journey. The others were waiting, their eyes snapping to the trio as they stepped forward. Thor placed the time stone carefully on the podium beside the others, its glow joining the faint hum of the energy the stones had already assembled. No one spoke immediately. The room was heavy with a mixture of relief and tension. Steve stepped forward, his head shifting between the stone and the trio who had retrieved it. You got it, he said quietly, his voice carrying both gratitude and a sense of the weight that had still remained. Thor nodded but said nothing, his thoughts still in the trials they had faced, and the ones yet to come. A collective exhale filled the room as Steve, Bruce, and the others moved towards them, their expressions of exhaustion melting into something lighter. Rocket let out a sharp breath and muttered, Damn, thought you guys got yourselves erased from existence. Steve stepped forward again, his eyes scanning over Thor, Tony, and Loki. You did a great job, everybody. Thor nodded. It wasn't easy, he admitted, glancing at Loki for the briefest moment before turning back to the group. But we have it. Tony rolled his shoulders, exhaling sharply. Yeah, let's not do that again. His usual sarcasm was there, but his eyes carried something deeper, something unsaid about what they have endured. Bruce, his gaze still locked on the assembled stones, let out a slow breath. Alright, that's 5. The brief moment of relief faded as reality settled in. 5 wasn't 6. 5 wasn't enough. Steve's expression hardened as he turned towards Clint. but we still need the Soul Stone. Clint, standing slightly apart from the others, barely lifted his head at the mention of it. His hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides, his shoulders rigid. He hadn't spoken much since returning from Vormir, and now, as all eyes were turned towards him, it was clear that whatever had happened was still weighing heavily on him. Bruce exhaled slowly. Clint, we need to know exactly what happened. Clint swallowed hard, his lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. He ran a hand over his face, finger pressing against his temples. The air in the room grew thick with quiet concern. His voice cracked, and he shut his eyes for a brief moment, as though trying to force the words out. She didn't hesitate. She fought me for it. His breath hitched, and his hands curled tighter. She made sure I was the only one who walked away. The room was completely still. The only sound was the faint hum of the quantum equipment in the background. Clint inhaled sharply, his eyes wet but furious with himself. But I don't understand. The stone was supposed to appear. It was supposed to be there. He looked up, his expression raw. But it never came. A cold chill settled over the group. From what little they knew, the Soul Stone was supposed to be obtained through sacrifice. At least that was the theory. But now Natasha was gone, and the stone never appeared. Just emptiness. Steve frowned, arms crossing over his chest. So what does that mean? That she died for nothing? No, Clint said immediately, his voice hoarse but firm. No, I refuse to believe that. Bruce hesitated before speaking. Then why didn't it work? If the stone is supposed to require a sacrifice, how did Thanos get it? The question sent a ripple of unease throughout the room. They had assumed that this was the way Vormir worked, that sacrifice was the price to pay. But if that were true, then why had Thanos succeeded where they had failed? Did he know something they didn't? Had he done something differently? Thor, who remained silent throughout most of the conversation, finally spoke. His voice was low, thoughtful. There's only one way to know for certain. He lifted his gaze, looking at each of them in turn. We go back. The suggestion hung in the air, unspoken at first but settling into the reality of their situation. If the Soul Stone hadn't appeared, they needed to find out why. They needed to return to Vormir. Bruce ran a hand through his hair, uneasy. And what if it asks for another sacrifice? Then we don't let it take one, Steve said, his voice steady. We find another way. Clint's jaw tightened as he took a slow breath before nodding. I have to go back. I have to know. No one argued. No one questioned. One way or another, they were heading to Vormir. The room remained heavy with the weight of their decision. The 5 stones they had gathered sat out on the podium, glowing softly, a near-complete puzzle missing only one crucial piece, the Soul Stone. Clint sat on the edge of a chair, hunched over, his hands clasped tightly together. His head was down, but the tension in his jaw made it clear. He was barely holding himself together. Across the room, Steve paced slowly, thinking as he tried to make sense of everything. Thor stood near the window, staring outside, but not really looking at anything. Tony was quiet, his eyes flickering between Clint and the podium, his mind moving just as fast as Steve's. Loki leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Steve finally stopped pacing and turned towards the group. We need to go back. Clint let out a slow, unsteady breath. I don't know what we're gonna find, he admitted, his voice hollow. I just know I have to go. Thor turned, finally facing them, his grip tightening around Stormbreaker this time. Then let's do it. Steve nodded. All right, we need a team. We can't risk bringing too many people, but we also can't go in blind. Clint, you're in. Clint barely nodded, his fingers tightening around his knee. I'll go too, Steve added. I need to see this for myself. Tony exhaled sharply, standing up straight. Yeah, me too. I'm not letting you two have all the fun. Thor let out a breath, nodding. Then I go as well. Loki's voice cut through the tension like a blade. I'll join. Thor's expression hardened instantly, turning to his brother. No, absolutely not. Loki smirked faintly, pushing off the wall. I don't recall needing your permission. You are not coming, Loki, Thor said firmly. Not this time. Loki raised an eyebrow. Because you don't trust me? Thor's eyes flashed. Because I shouldn't. Loki tilted his head slightly again, his smirk deepening. And yet, I'm still standing here. Thor clenched his jaw, but before he could speak, Tony stepped in. All right, big guy, take a breath. Thor turned sharply towards Tony, but Tony raised a hand before he could argue. Look, I get it. You've got a lifetime of brotherly trauma to work through, and normally, I'd be all for letting you two duke it out. But let's focus on the mission. We don't know what we're walking into, and Loki is, whether we like it or not, good at slipping through tight spots. Thor's nostrils flared, his grip tightening on the hammer again. You're vouching for him? Tony sighed. I'm just saying we spent however long together in a nightmare dimension, and if Loki wanted to screw us over, he had plenty of chances. But he didn't. Loki spread his hands out, looking almost amused. For what it's worth, I'm quite enjoying this endorsement. Thor's glare remained locked on his brother. You betray us, and I'll end you myself. Loki grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. Steve gave out a firm nod. Alright, then it's settled. We go in, we find out what happened, and if there's a way to get the Soul Stone, we take it. Bruce, who had been silent, finally spoke. And what if the price is another life? Steve's expression darkened, but his voice was steady. Then we find another way. No one argued. Tony tapped a few buttons on the device strapped to his wrist. Alright, everyone sync up. One jump, no detours. Clint took a slow, steadying breath and stood, his eyes dark with something unreadable. The others activated their devices. A second later, the room dissolved into light, and Vormir's barren wasteland stretched before them. The cold bit at their skin the moment they arrived. The sky stretched endlessly in all directions, a void of swirling gray, untouched by the stars. Jagged black mountains loomed around them, the air unnaturally still. Vormir was exactly as Clint remembered it, yet somehow, standing here again, it felt worse. Their boots crunched against the dead rock as they made their way forward, the silence between them heavy. Clint led them. He didn't need to. The path only wound one way, up. But his steps were slow, deliberate, like he was walking towards something he already knew would haunt him. They reached the summit. Silence. Last time, a figure had been waiting for them. A ghostly wraith shrouded in a black cloak, speaking in riddles about sacrifice and destiny. Now, there was nothing. Clint swallowed hard, his throat dry. He was here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Steve scanned the area, his grip tightening on his shield. Then where is he? Thor stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Something felt off. Wrong. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that wasn't there before. The realm itself almost seemed to be waiting. Then, footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. The wind that had been howling through the peaks only moments ago stopped completely. A massive figure stepped forward from the shadows. Thanos. No armor, no sword, just the sheer, undeniable weight of his presence. His face was unreadable, his expression neither hostile nor victorious. He walked with a purpose, his massive hand gripping something he dragged behind him. Clint took a step back, his breath hitching. The others stood their ground, but the air between them turned to ice. Then Thanos threw the object forward. It landed with a sickening thud. A severed head, Red Skull's lifeless, hollow eyes stared up at them, his once ominous presence now reduced to nothing more than discarded remains. Blood pooled into the cracks of the stone beneath him, seeping into the ground as if the planet itself was absorbing the horror. No one spoke. Steve's jaw tightened, his hands flexing instinctively over the grip of his shield. Thor's grip around Stormbreaker became white-knuckled. Tony barely breathed. Loki's smirk, the one he always wore no matter the situation, was gone. Clint simply stared. Thanos' voice finally broke the silence, deep and steady, like a quiet storm rolling in. I didn't trust you. The words lingered in the air, cold and absolute. I gave you a chance, he continued, his tone unnervingly calm. A chance to leave the universe whole, to be grateful. Clint's breath was ragged, his eyes darting between the severed head and Thanos' impassive face. No, he whispered. Thanos tilted his head slightly, observing them. And yet, he said, stepping forward. Here you are. Steve inhaled sharply, forcing himself to steady his voice. What did you do? Thanos didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his right hand. The golden infinity gauntlet gleamed under the dim light, fully assembled, all 6 stones embedded in place. The breath that left Tony's lungs was almost audible. Oh. Then Thanos lifted his left hand. A second soul stone, the same unmistakable, sickly orange glow. Steve exhaled sharply, stepping forward. That's not possible. Thanos' lips curled onto something that wasn't quite a smile. It is now. Thor's voice was low, dangerous. What have you done? Thanos raised the stone slightly, letting its glow reflect in his dark eyes. What was necessary? Loki's voice finally cut through the silence, sharp and disbelieving. 2 soul stones? His gaze flickered between Thanos' hands. That shouldn't be possible. The stones exist outside of time. You can't take 2 of them from the same reality. Thanos glanced at him before briefly turning his gaze back to the others. That's true. A slow, suffocating realization began to dawn on them. Thanos saw it settle in their expressions before they even spoke. His fingers flexed slightly around the stone. I didn't trust you, he repeated. I knew you would come. I knew you would never leave well enough alone. He took a step forward, and despite the lack of aggression in his voice, the sheer weight of his presence alone sent every nerve in their bodies screaming to be ready for a fight. But you didn't have to come here, he continued. You could have let the universe exist as it was, whole, balanced. His eyes darkened slightly, as though disappointed. I gave you that choice. His fingers tightened around the stone. Without a word, he lifted his left hand, and the air between them tore open. A swirling portal appeared. It didn't shimmer like their time travel portals. It didn't glow with magic. It ripped through the fabric of reality like an open wound. The edges flickering violently, the space within it twisting with something raw and merciless. Inside, the past unfolded, but it was not their past. It was something else. Thanos looked at them. His voice, calm and final, echoed through the mountains. I gave you a chance. And then, they watched. The swirling portal flickered violently, its edges cracking like a wound rippled open in reality itself. The team stared into the shifting void, the heavy silence broken by only the faint hum of the energy in the air. Then, movement. A scene began to form. Not Vormir, not yet. Instead, a quiet lakeside cabin. Tony's breath caught in his throat. The image sharpened, showing a bright afternoon outside Stark's cabin. The lake stretched endlessly behind it, calm and still. The sun bathed everything in warm, golden light. Birds chirping in the distance. Pepper was outside with Morgan. Tony barely breathed, his hands trembling as he took an unconscious step forward. He knew exactly where this was. Morgan giggled as she ran through the grass, chasing after a butterfly. Pepper stood nearby, watching her with a soft smile, holding a mug of tea. It was peaceful until something shifted. The birds stopped chirping. The air grew heavy, like the atmosphere itself was recoiling. Pepper felt it first. She frowned, glancing around. The breeze stopped, the trees eerily still. The warmth of the sun dimmed slightly, like something had stolen a fraction of its light. Then, behind Morgan, a portal opened. Thanos stepped through, not in a rush, not with violence, just purpose. His massive frame loomed over Morgan, the purple of his skin stark against the golden sunlight. Morgan froze. She looked up at him, wide-eyed, confused. She was too young to understand. For one agonizing second, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Then Pepper screamed. Morgan! Thanos' hand closed around the little girl's arm. Pepper ran. Tony lurched forward in the present, pure instinct, but the moment he moved, Thanos clenched his fist, and reality itself froze him in place. The entire team locked in position, helpless. Tony fought against the invisible force with everything he had, his veins bulging, muscles straining, his entire being rejecting what he was seeing. You did not! Pepper was nearly there, just a few feet away, but Thanos stepped back into his portal with Morgan, disappearing. The portal snapped shut. Pepper collapsed onto her knees, her screams echoing long after she was gone. The image dissolved. Tony stood paralyzed, his face ashen, his breath short, his entire body shaking violently. Thanos turned his head slightly toward him, watching, studying. Then, with a voice so calm it was suffocating, he said, "You will want to see the rest." The portal shifted. Vormir. The air was bitter. The sky is that endless void of swirling gray. The past played before them, flickering and unstable. But the moment was painfully clear. Clint and Natasha stood at the edge of the sacrificial cliff. Clint's face twisted in agony as he clung to her wrist, refusing to let go. "It's okay." Natasha's voice shook, but there was no hesitation, no fear. "Let me go." The team in the present watched helplessly as past Clint screamed, his grip slipping. They already know how this ended. Natasha fell. Her body plummeted towards the rocks below, arms outstretched, her face calm, her choice made. Clint squeezed his eyes shut in the present, his breath ragged, unable to watch. But this time, something changed. Before she hit the ground, a massive hand reached out from the darkness below. Thanos. His fingers clamped around Natasha's throat mid-fall. Her body jerked violently, the momentum snapping to a halt as she dangled, helplessly, suspended in the air. The past Clint on the cliff had no idea. He was already believing her to be dead. Natasha's eyes flew open, gasping as she clawed at Thanos' grip. She was alive. And then she saw him, their eyes locked. For a single, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then, snap. The sound was too quiet for how final it was. Thanos broke her neck in one effortless movement. Her body went limp instantly. Thanos turned slightly, like she was nothing more than a distraction, and tossed her aside. She hit the rocks hard, her body crumpling with an unnatural heap. Steve shook his head violently in the present. Hawkeye couldn't move. He could only stare, frozen in silent, soul-crushing horror. Thor gritted his teeth so hard they nearly cracked, his shoulders heaving with barely contained rage. Tony couldn't speak. He just hung his mouth open, his body shaking violently, like his mind was rejecting what he just saw. And it wasn't over. From the shadows, Morgan stepped forward. The tiny girl walked silently, her hands at her sides, her eyes wide with curiosity. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't crying, she wasn't running. She was entranced. The circle beneath her feet began to glow. Thanos didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The moment she stepped fully onto the sacrificial site, light erupted around her, consuming her in a golden, pulsing glow. The Soul Stone manifested in Thanos' hand. Morgan was gone. She didn't scream. She didn't even seem to understand what was happening. Just a flicker of orange light, and then, nothing. Thanos exhaled slowly, gripping the stone tight. Then, without hesitation, he turned and walked away, disappearing into a portal. He had left no trace, no sign that he had ever been there. The portal in the present snapped shut. Silence. Thanos turned his gaze back towards them, unreadable. He had no defense, no justification, just a single, calm statement. The universe is better this way. The silence stretched. Then, Tony Stark broke. The sound that left his throat was not human, a strangled, gasping breath. A noise that wasn't quite a sob, because even sobbing would mean he had still air left to breathe. He stumbled backwards, his legs buckling, his body shaking violently. Morgan. Clint's hands were clutching in his hair, his fingers digging into his skull, as if he was trying to tear the image out of his mind. Thor's chest heaved. His grip on Stormbreaker was so white-knuckled that it was a miracle it didn't shatter in his hands. Steve's breathing was shallow, his head shaking slightly, eyes still locked onto the spot where the portal had been. And Loki. For once, Loki had no words. No one did. They had walked into a nightmare, and it wasn't over yet. The wind cut through the peaks of Vormir, howling across the desolate landscape, but none of them felt it. The weight pressing down on them had nothing to do with the air, the cold, or the elevation. It was something deeper, something crushing. They had just witnessed the impossible. Morgan was gone. Not taken by war, not lost in a moment of chaos or some random twist of fate. Plucked from her home, used like a piece of currency, sacrificed. Natasha had been discarded like a broken toy. Her final act of heroism meant nothing. And Thanos, he had let them see it all. No gloating, no villainous monologue, just the truth, laid bare. Tony Stark had not moved. He couldn't. He knelt in the dust, his arms limp at his sides, his fingers slack, twitching slightly. His breath came in short, stuck grasps, his entire body trembling like a man suffering from shock. His eyes were open, but they didn't focus on anything. He wasn't really there, not on Vormir, not with them. He was somewhere else, somewhere irreparable. Clint wasn't doing much better. He had taken a staggering step backward, his fingers tangling in his hair, his hands pressing into his temples like he could physically tear the memory out of his skull. He made a small noise in the back of his throat, something between a choked breath and a sob. but no one looked at him. No one could. Thor had gone still, his face cast in shadow, his grip on Stormbreaker so tight it could have shattered. Steve wanted to move. He wanted to say something, to step forward and take control, to do what he had always done, find a way forward. But what was there to say? What was left to lead? They had lost. Their mission was gone. The chance of the Soul Stone had been a lie, an illusion that had cost them everything. Loki remained silent, watching the spot where the portal had flickered closed. He was unreadable, but his posture was rigid. His arms no longer crossed, his usual air of detachment completely gone. He had no quips, no clever remarks. Not for this, and in front of them all, still standing, still waiting, was Thanos. He made no move to attack, no move to defend himself. He had no reason to. Tony's fingers curled slightly in the dirt beneath them. A slow breath rattled in his throat, but he still didn't look up. His body trembled with the sheer effort of forcing oxygen into his lungs, forcing his heart to keep beating. His chest heaved, his pulse was erratic, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought, this is what breaking feels like. Then his lips moved. One word. Quiet. Hoarse. A whisper of something barely alive. Why? Thanos' head tilted slightly. Tony lifted his gaze, slowly, as if it physically pained him to do so. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. Why her? His voice cracked. Why Morgan? The words lingered in the air, hanging between them all like a sickness that had settled deep in their bones. Thanos studied them all, his expression unreadable, his face carved from stone. You misunderstood something, he finally said, his voice steady, unshaken. You think suffering must serve a purpose, that loss requires meaning. His eyes swept across them slowly, as though he found them pitiful. It does not. Tony's face twisted, his teeth grinding together so hard it was a miracle they didn't shatter. Bullshit! Thanos watched him, unmoved. You could have taken anyone, Tony hissed. His voice shook, teetering between grief and rage. But you took my daughter! His breaths came short, uneven, furious, his hands curled into his fists, his body vibrating with unrestrained fury. Why? Why Morgan? Thanos regarded him for a moment, as if contemplating whether the answer even mattered. Then finally, he answered, because one death was not enough. The air around them seemed to drop in temperature. Steve's breath hitched. Clint staggered. Thor's grip on Stormbreaker yet again tightened. Tony just stared. Your friend's life was meant to be a lesson, Thanos continued. You were given the opportunity to leave the universe as it was, whole, restored. But you came back. His head tilted slightly, observing Tony as though he were a failed experiment. So I made certain you understood. Tony's breathing stuttered, his chest heaving. The words just hadn't broke him, they had shattered them. And then, he moved. The nanotech responded before he did. His armor formed instantly, the red and gold plating wrapping around his body in the blink of an eye. His pulse pounded in his ears, his mind screaming. Then he flew, a blur of rage and grief, tearing towards Thanos with everything he had. But the moment he got close, he stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because Thanos willed it. Tony's entire body locked midair, frozen, inches away, held in place. He was so close. Close enough to see the lines in Thanos' skin, the faint glow of the gauntlet, the complete and utter disinterest in the Titan's eyes. Tony struggled, his limbs trembled, his entire body pushing against nothing. But it was useless. Thanos wasn't even holding him. He didn't need to. The air itself refused to let Tony move. Thanos regarded him for a moment longer, as if he had already forgotten him. Then, with no effort at all, he flicked his fingers, and Tony flew backward, hard. He hit the ground with a crash, his suit flickering, collapsing under the sheer force of the impact. A gasp tore from his throat, his breath leaving him in violent shudder. Steve was there, gripping his arm, steadying him, pulling him up, but neither of them spoke. Because there was nothing left to say, Thanos exhaled, adjusting the gauntlet. Keep this in mind the next time you decide to be ungrateful, to interfere with balance. Then, without another word, a portal opened behind him, and just like that, he was gone. The wind picked up again. Steve exhaled, rubbing a hand over his mouth before swallowing and setting in his jaw. He looked at each of them, one by one. They had nothing, but they still had a choice. Let's go home, he said. We'll figure this out. And this time, no one argued. Yeah, remember when I told you I wanted to make this one a little bit more brutal, or a lot more brutal? This is one of the things that I had in mind. I thought Black Widow's death was so tragically beautiful. I loved everything about it, so why not make it worse? We're not done yet, though, because it gets even better. The landing was rough. Even as the time portal snapped shut behind them, the air in Avengers HQ felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. The moment their boots hit the floor, the tension hit harder. No one spoke. No one even moved. The lights above them were too bright, buzzing faintly against the dull ringing in their ears. The mission had failed. Failed so completely that failure didn't even feel like the right word anymore. Tony stood still, just breathing. The suit had already begun peeling back from his body, but his hands remained clenched into fists, the edges of his fingers pressing so deep into his palms it left behind angry red lines. No one had dared to say anything yet. Steve turned slightly, exhaling through his nose, trying to find the words that didn't exist. But the second his foot shifted against the floor, Tony's head snapped toward him, and then it all broke loose. Tony's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I told you." Steve barely had time to react before Tony took a step forward, the weight of his words slamming into him harder than a punch ever could. "I told you," Tony repeated, louder this time. His breathing was shallow, uneven, erratic, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning on dry land. He gestured wildly toward nothing in particular, his hands shaking with something too violent to be contained. "I told you this would happen." Steve opened his mouth, but Tony didn't let him speak. "No, no, no," Tony spat, shaking his head. "You don't get to talk. Not now. Not after that." He let out a short, humorous laugh, a sharp, bitter thing that held no amusement. "Because you were wrong, Cap. So wrong. And it cost us." His voice caught, his throat convulsing like the words physically hurt to say. "Everything." Steve took a slow breath, steadying himself. He wanted to say something, anything, but Tony's fury was a living thing, too big, too uncontrollable, filling the space like wildfire. "You knew," Tony continued, his voice rising, eyes burning. "You knew what he was capable of, what he had already done." His hands clenched, unclenched, clenched again. "You looked me in the eye, Steve. You said we'd do this together." Steve stiffened, already knowing what was coming next. "You said we'd lose together." The words slammed into him like a hammer. Tony's chest heaved, his shoulders shaking under the weight of every second of suffering that had led to this moment. "But we didn't lose together, did we?" Tony's voice cracked, sharp and hoarse. "Because I didn't lose anything, Steve. You did. You lost a battle. You lost the world you wanted. But me?" He let out a breath that was almost a sob, almost a scream, almost something in between. "I lost my goddamn family." The words hit the room like a detonation. No one moved. Thor was watching in silence, his gaze unreadable. Loki had his arms crossed, but there was no arrogance in his posture, only careful, cautious stillness. Clint stood like a man who had already been beaten beyond recognition, his face turned towards the floor, eyes empty. Steve just stared at him. "I know you're angry," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. Tony laughed, a single, broken sound. "No," he shot back, taking another step forward, his face twisted with something ugly, something unrecognizable. "You don't know a damn thing." His voice was almost wild now, shaking with something bigger than rage, bigger than grief. He forced himself forward, getting so close to Steve that their shadows merged between the artificial lights. "You don't know what it was like, standing there, watching her vanish." Tony's voice cracked again. "You don't know what it was like knowing I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it." Steve's throat tightened, swallowed a little bit. Tony's hands continued twitching at his sides. "I should have stayed out of it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I should have never come back, but I did, and now she's..." His breath hitched, his chest locking mid-sentence. He swallowed hard, his pulse hammering behind his ribs. "Gone." The word died in his mouth. Steve had no response, but there was nothing he could say. Nothing could undo it. Nothing could make it right. The only sound left in the room was Tony's breathing, the heavy, shallow rhythm of someone who had lost everything. Then, another voice broke through. "What happened?" Everyone turned. Bruce stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, his expression tight, uncertain. He had been watching from the moment they arrived, but now, his eyes were flicking between Tony and Steve, then finally landing on Clint. It was Clint's silence that unsettled him the most. "What the hell happened?" Bruce asked again, stepping forward. Nobody answered. Clint swallowed once, hard. His lips parted, but no words came out. His fingers twitched, curling into palms before loosening again. Bruce's frown deepened. Thor looked away. Loki's smirk never came. Bruce turned his gaze back to Steve and Tony. Tony inhaled sharply, pressing his fingers to his temples, his whole body vibrating with restrained fury. He was trying not to look at Bruce, trying not to say it. But then he did. Thanos took my daughter. The room froze. Bruce blinked, as if he had misheard. What? Tony exhaled through his nose, his voice sharper and bitter. He took her, Bruce. Walked up right at my house and plucked my daughter from my backyard while Pepper watched. And then he used her, like a bargaining chip, like a goddamn sacrifice. Bruce's face fell, the coloring draining from his skin. Tony took a slow, shaking step forward. While we were busy thinking we had any control over this fight, while we were still acting like we could win, he was already ahead of us. And you know what, Bruce? His voice wavered, rage and grief entwining into something sharp and ugly. It worked. He got exactly what he wanted. Bruce just looked at him. Tony turned away, running a hand through his hair, his face pinched in anguish. So yeah, you want to know what happened? He let out a harsh breath. We lost. Silence pressed down on them all. No one spoke. Tony didn't say another word. His expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. He just moved. Before anyone could react, the nanotech crawled over his skin, forming a suit in an instant. The soft hum of the arc reactor filled with silence, but Tony didn't look at them. He didn't wait for questions. He didn't acknowledge their stares. Didn't offer a single explanation. He turned, and then he was gone. The thrusters ignited, sending him straight through the nearest window. Glass shattered, a burst of wind rushing into the room as he disappeared into the night. No hesitation, no goodbyes, just silence, and an empty space where he had been. For a movie like Endgame, and I'm sorry, I feel bad for and I don't know if I should be even pausing throughout this video, I wanted to feel like there were even more tensions, more at stake than Infinity War, more happening. This is the final movie. I wanted to add something that seemed like just to make everything more important than what we actually did see in Infinity War. It didn't sit with me that everyone seemed to like one part better than the finale, but as I mentioned, we still have so much to cover through this that we're not even close to being done yet. I hope you're enjoying it so far, by the way. The cabin was dark when Tony arrived. The sky had settled into a deep navy blue, the last remnants of daylight swallowed by the trees that lined the quiet lake. The house, once a place of peace, of warmth, of laughter, now sat in heavy, suffocating silence. Tony didn't hesitate. He landed hard, the suit retracting from his body the moment his feet hit the ground. His pulse was thrumming in his ears, his hands aching from how tightly he had been clenching them, but none of it mattered. Pepper, she was inside. He moved toward the door, his footsteps crunching against a gravel path. He barely noticed the black SUVs parked out front, the vague moment of suits just standing inside the porch, the lights glow. The FBI. They had been called, just as he expected. It made sense. How else would a mother react when her child, their child, was ripped from her hands by a force she couldn't even begin to understand? Someone stepped out in front of him before he reached the door. A man in a crisp suit, talking in a clipped professional tone. Something about a possible abduction, about how they were launching an official investigation, about what he needed to tell them. Tony walked straight past him. The man put a hand on his arm, a firm but cautious grip. "Mr. Stark, we need you to cooperate." Tony shrugged him off without even breaking his stride. He wasn't there for them. Inside, the air felt too thick, too still. A few agents were posted near the entrance, speaking quietly to one another, but Tony didn't stop. He didn't even glance in their direction. His feet carried him forward with a purpose, taking him straight to the living room. And then he saw her. Pepper sat on the couch, motionless, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were holding herself together by sheer force of will. The only light came from the fireplace, casting shadows across her face, deepening the hollows in her expression. She didn't look at him at first. She was staring at the floor, her eyes glazed, her breath slow, unsteady. She had been crying. Not fresh tears, but the kind that had drained her completely, leaving her in a state of numb exhaustion. Tony felt something in his chest twist so violently it nearly knocked the breath out of him. Then she looked up. The moment her eyes met his, something inside her broke. Her face crumpled, and then the next sob ripped from her chest so suddenly, so violently, she nearly doubled over from the weight of it. Tony crossed the room in an instant, kneeling in front of her, his hands hovering just inches away. He wasn't sure where to touch her, how to hold her, how to even begin fixing this. She shook her head, her hands trembling as they clutched the fabric of her shirt, gasping for breath between sobs. He just came through a portal, Tony. He just walked in and... Tony's jaw tightened. He squeezed her eyes shut, her voice breaking apart mid-sentence. I tried to grab her. I tried to stop him. I swear to God, Tony reached out, his hand catching hers, squeezing them tightly. I know. Her breath hitched, her lips trembled. Then she collapsed into him. Tony wrapped his arms around her, his grip so tight he could even feel the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat against his own. She was shaking uncontrollably, clutching him onto like he was the only thing keeping her into reality. He closed his eyes, pressing his face into her hair, breathing her in, grounding himself in the only thing that mattered right now. "I'm going to fix this." Pepper made a sound, something between a sob and a breath, something so small, so fragile, it nearly shattered him. "I will make this right," he said again, firmer this time. And this time he meant it. The scene quickly transitions back to HQ with the remaining Avengers. The sound of Tony's suit touching down outside sends a small ripple of movement through the compound. Conversations died, heads turned, no one needed to be told who it was. Tony was back. Bruce and Steve had been standing in the main hall, going over what few stones they had managed to recover, when the unmistakable sound of heavy boots striking the floor filled the room. The walk was fast, purposeful, angry. Then Tony appeared, stepping into the view like a storm had just rolled in. His face was unreadable, his body tense, his eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. No one spoke at first. Everyone knew he had left without a word. But now he was back. It was impossible to ignore the energy radiating off of him. Something colder than rage, something more dangerous than grief. Tony's gaze locked onto Steve. He didn't look at anyone else. "We're going after Thanos," he said. The words weren't a suggestion. They were an order. Steve exhaled slowly, his arms crossing as he prepared himself for what was coming. "Tony." "Don't," Tony cut him off immediately, his voice like flint. "I'm not in the mood for the whole I think it through speech." Steve didn't move, his expression tightening. "We have to think it through. We're not ready." Tony scoffed, shaking his head. "Not really? We've never been ready, Cap. We weren't ready when he showed up at our doorstep the first time, and we sure as hell weren't ready on Vormir." He took a step forward, his voice rising. "And guess what? He still has all the stones, except now there's an extra one in the mix. So tell me, what exactly are we waiting for?" Thor shifted from where he had been leaning against the far wall, his arms crossed. "You think we can just walk in and take them from him?" His tone wasn't dismissive, but there was doubt in it. "He overpowered all of us when we had a chance." Tony turned on him, eyes burning. "Then we make another one." Bruce spoke up from where he had been listening, arms folded tight over his chest. "Tony, listen. I know what he did to Morgan." "No," Tony snapped, pointing at him. "You don't. None of you do. You saw it, but you don't get it." His voice was unsteady. His words didn't falter. "This isn't just about bringing people back anymore. He still has all the stones. That means this isn't over. That means he can do it again, whenever he wants. You really want to gamble on how long he decides to keep playing farmer before he wipes us off the board for good?" A heavy silence followed. Steve finally exhaled, his voice calm but firm. "We need the rest of the stones before we even think about facing him." Tony's jaw clenched. "We don't have time for that." "We have to make time." Steve met his stare without flinching. "We've been chasing the wrong fight. We don't need to kill him, Tony. We need to take his stones." Tony let out a sharp laugh, humorous and bitter. "And how do you plan on doing that, huh? We stroll in, ask him nicely, give him a really inspiring speech about teamwork?" Bruce's frown deepened. "Tony." "No," Tony shot back, his voice rising again. "I'm serious. How do you plan on taking the stones from a guy who already beat us with them once? What, do we hope he just drops the gauntlet this time? Maybe he's feeling generous?" Steve looked back at Tony. "We outsmart him." Tony stared at him, and for the first time since walking into a room, his expression changed. It wasn't anger now. It wasn't frustration. It was exhaustion. The kind that settled deep into the bones, in the spaces between the heartbeat. The kind that didn't go away. He looked down for a second, shaking his head slowly before exhaling through his nose. "You still don't get it." Steve didn't speak. Tony ran a hand through his hair, gripping on the back of his neck before finally looking back up. "You still think this is a game of chess? Like if we just find the right move, we'll win?" He swallowed, his jaw tightening. "But this isn't chess, Cap. This is us, still trying to clean up the mess we made while he sits on his throne with every single advantage." "We are not giving up," Steve said quietly. Tony scoffed again. "We already lost. We're just deciding how we want to go out." Another silence followed. Thor pushed off the wall, stepping closer now, his gaze flickering between them both. "We have a choice to make," he said. "Either we gather what we can, or we go after him with what we have." There it was, the real question. Tony crossed his arms looking at Steve. "Well, what's it gonna be, fearless leader?" Steve took a slow breath, eyes locked onto his. "I say we finish what we started." The room had settled into another uneasy silence. Tony was still standing at the center of it, fists clenched at his sides, the weight of his own words pressing down on the room like a storm had yet to break. The debate had gone nowhere. They were at a standstill. One side demanding action, the other demanding strategy. No answers, no solutions. Then, from the corner of the room, a slow, deliberate chuckle. Loki. The sound slithered through the tense air, cutting through the silence like a blade. He was lounging on one of the chairs, legs crossed, fingers steeped together as if he had been thoroughly entertained by the whole affair. "You're all thinking like soldiers," he said, tilting his head slightly, "not like tricksters." Every set of eyes turned to him. Steve stiffened, his expression darkening. "You have something to say?" Loki smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "I always do." Tony exhaled sharply, already irritated. "Yeah, well, unless it's I've got a way to kill Thanos and steal his lunch money, then you can shut up." Loki only grinned wider, enjoying this. "Oh, Stark," he purred. "I think by now you'd have learned that brute force alone won't win you this fight." He gestured vaguely toward them all. "You stand here, bickering like children, trying to decide whether to strike or wait, but why are you only considering those two options?" Bruce frowned, his arms still folded. "Are those not the only options we have?" Loki clicked his tongue in disapproval. "That's where you're wrong." Steve took a slow step forward, his voice flat. "Get to the point." Loki uncrossed his legs, leaning forward now, his voice dropping into something lower, smoother. "Thanos is many things," he said. "Powerful, unyielding, relentless." He tilted his head. "But he is not without ego." That got their attention. Loki smirked again. "You're all so concerned with whether or not you can defeat him, but what if you didn't have to?" A flicker of something passed through Thor's expression. He didn't interrupt, but he was watching his brother intently now. Steve frowned. "What are you saying?" Loki spread his hands as if it were obvious. "What if, instead of challenging Thanos, we made him believe he had already won?" The words settled heavily over the room. A beat of silence. Then, Tony scoffed. "You're out of your damn mind if you think we're letting you waltz into Thanos' arms." Loki raised an eyebrow. "Why not? He wouldn't kill me." Thor finally spoke, his voice low. "Wouldn't he?" Loki turned to his brother, smirking slightly. "He already did once. Do you really think he'd bother doing it again?" Steve's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to trust you?" "Trust is such a fragile thing," Loki said, placing a hand over his chest in mock sincerity. "And one I never seem to be granted in this charming little group." He looked up, meeting Steve's gaze. "But whether you trust me or not, you can't deny that this is your best chance." Tony shook his head, pacing slightly. "No, absolutely not. I don't care how good of a liar you are. I'm not sending you in to kiss the Mad Titan's boots and pray he doesn't crush your skull just for fun." Loki's smirk grew. "Ah, but that's where you fail to see the brilliance of it, Stark. He won't crush me, not if I offer him something he wants." Steve exhaled sharply. "And what exactly do you plan on offering?" Loki leaned back again, his expression shifting into something unreadable. "I have a few ideas." Thor stepped forward now, the tension between him and Loki thick. "And how do we know you won't enjoy this a little too much?" Loki's smirk faltered for just a moment. A flicker of something in his expression, something that wasn't quite amusement. Then he smiled again, slow and sharp. "Because," he said simply, "I want to see him fall just as much as you do." That hung in the air, heavier than before. The group remained silent, absorbing the weight of his words. Thor was still staring at him, searching for something beneath the mask. Steve was tense, conflicted. Bruce looked skeptical, but not entirely dismissive. Tony was furious, but none of them could deny it. They had no better plan, and they were running out of time. The room had never been this quiet. The weight of the conversation hung over them all, pressing down like an invisible force none of them could shake. Loki had made his move, and now the Avengers had to decide if they were willing to gamble everything on it. Steve crossed his arms, his jaw tight, his thoughts clearly at war with each other. "Let's say we do this. Let's say we send you in. How exactly do you convince Thanos to let you breathe long enough to tell your story?" Loki smirked. "Simple. I offer him something he cannot refuse." Tony scoffed again, already exasperated. "Oh good, an offer. I can't wait to hear this one." Loki leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. He looked straight at Tony when he spoke. "The Time Stone." A beat of silence. Then, "No," Tony said immediately. Steve frowned. "Wait, do you mean a replica or something, right?" Loki shook his head, his expression unreadable. "No, the real one." Tony exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. You've got to be kidding me. Bruce, who had been listening quietly up until now, finally spoke. It could work. Tony turned on him instantly. Excuse me? Bruce gestured vaguely between them. Thanos isn't stupid. He'd see through a fake in a second. But if Loki walks in with a real thing, it gives him credibility. Makes it look like he really has abandoned us if that's what he's going for. That he's looking out for himself, like he always does. Loki grinned. Flattering. Steve shook his head. Even if it convinces Thanos we're going to give him another Infinity Stone, that puts us at an even bigger disadvantage. Thor, who had been silent for most of this, finally spoke. His voice was quiet. We already don't have enough stones to undo what he's done. The Time Stone is meaningless to us if we don't have them all. If we don't have another way forward, perhaps it is worth the risk. Steve sighed, looking between them all, clearly weighing the options. And what if Loki actually does betray us? Then we just handed Thanos exactly what he needs. Tony scoffed. Please, Loki, if he wanted to screw us over, he would have done it already. Everyone turned to him surprised. Tony rolled his eyes. What? I don't trust the guy, but if he wanted to hand Thanos the upper hand, he wouldn't be standing here arguing with us. He'd already be on his way to bend the knee or whatever creepy Game of Thrones crap Thanos is into. Loki raised a brow. How refreshing, a compliment from Tony Stark. I'll cherish this moment forever. Tony ignored him, rubbing at his temple. Alright, let's say we do this. What's the play here? You just show up and say, hey big guy, I'm back and totally not lying to you. Loki's smirk widened. Something like that, but with a bit more charm. Thor's gaze was still on his brother, still assessing. He didn't trust this fully. Not yet. And if he sees through it? Loki's expression didn't change. Then I die. Again. A tense pause followed. Thor clenched his fist, but didn't argue further. Steve sighed, finally running a hand down his face. Alright, but if the second something feels off, we pull you out. Understood? Everybody? Loki's grin returned. Of course. You have my word. Tony muttered under his breath. Yeah, that makes me feel real confident. Steve turned to Bruce. How soon can we get the Time Stone to Loki? Bruce hesitated, then explained. I can have it ready right now. It's not like we have to put it in a box or something. Loki clapped his hands together. Then it seems we have ourselves a deal. No one looked particularly happy about it, but no one had a better plan, and time was running out. As you can tell, I know this is way off course for Endgame, but don't worry, the story will wrap up just as well as it did. I'm excited for you to see what I actually have planned, because if you thought we've seen anything so far that was potentially a little bit more brutal than Endgame, just you wait. But again, I do want to mention all of your favorite moments are still within this story. We're just putting a lot of stuff in between. The compound was quieter than usual. Most of the team had retreated onto different corners of the base, pretending to focus on something else, but everyone was waiting for Loki to leave, waiting to see if they had just signed their own death warrants. Loki, of course, taking his time. He adjusted the sleeves of his coat, checking his reflection in a darkened screen, smoothing a hand over his hair like he was preparing for a royal gala, not a suicide mission. Thor watched him from across the room, arms crossed, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Loki sighed dramatically. I can feel you glaring at me, brother. It's distracting. Thor didn't move, didn't blink, and you deserve worse. Loki smirked, though it was weaker than usual. You wound me. Thor took a step forward. You're playing a dangerous game. Loki tilted his head. When have I ever played anything else? Thor exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This isn't a joke, Loki. You walk into Thanos' grasp and you might not walk out. Loki gave him an incredible look. Did you forget, dear brother? I've done this before. Thor's jaw clenched, and he killed you for it. Loki's expression flickered for just a moment, just long enough for Thor to see the weight behind his eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Yes, Loki admitted, voice quieter now. He did. Thor swallowed, struggling to push past the emotion threatening to choke him. Then why do this? Loki's smirk softened, but there was something tired beneath it. Because, brother, I have no intention on dying for him again. Thor stared back at him, looking for something, anything that proved these words weren't just another trick. You're a fool, Thor muttered. Loki grinned back, and you love me for it. Thor clenched his fists. He hated this, hated not knowing if this was real, if Loki had finally chosen the right path, or if he was just walking himself into oblivion. You come back, Thor said, voice rough. You hear me? You come back. Loki's gaze softened. For once, he didn't deflect. I'll do my best, he murmured. Thor exhaled sharply, hesitating. Then suddenly, he pulled Loki into a tight embrace. Loki stiffened at first, hands hovering awkwardly at his sides. Then, after a moment, he slowly relaxed into it. For a second, neither brother spoke. Then Loki muttered, his voice muffled against Thor's armor. All right, let's not get sentimental. I have a reputation to maintain. Thor didn't let go immediately, but then he did, stepping back, swallowing down everything he wanted to say. Loki adjusted his coat again, almost looking casual. He turned towards the others, Steve watching from a distance, Tony leaning against a table, arms crossed tightly. Shall we then? Loki said smoothly. Loki's gaze flickered between them all, then he reached forward for the stone, fingers curling around it. He held it for a moment. Then he smirked. Now we see if I'm as good as I think I am. He stepped back, turning on his heel, and then he was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but silence. Loki reappeared in the cold, empty void of space. Not entirely empty. A ruined ship drifted in the darkness above him, its engines long dead, its frames scarred from past battles. The remains of Sanctuary 2, one of Thanos' former flagships, now serving as a gathering place for what is left of his army. Loki took a slow breath, adjusting his coat. It had to start here. If Thanos was anywhere, it would be where his loyalists had gathered. The Black Order was gone, the Sanctuary was in ruins, but remnants remained, his lieutenants, his warhounds, the desperate, the fanatical, the ones still waiting for their Titan to return. Loki let himself be seen. He stood tall, his expression cold, his posture unwavering. He was not there to stay in the shadows. He was there to make a statement. It did not take long. The first shadow moved above him, then another. A dozen figures emerged from the darkness, Thanos' forces moving like vultures circling fish prey. A massive armored figure stepped towards first, not one of the Black Order, but a lesser general, draped in ruined battle-worn robes, a blade strapped to his back. His voice was a low growl. You should be dead. Loki's lips curled in amusement. So I've heard. Weapons were raised, not in fear, in preparation. They did not trust him. He was a trickster, a deceiver, a man who had already failed Thanos once. Loki didn't flinch. You can kill me, he said casually, tilting his head, or you can take me to him. The warriors hesitated. A single raised hand from the general halted them. He stepped forward, scrutinizing Loki for a long moment. Then his gaze drifted to Loki's hand. The time stone, glowing, unmistakable. The general's eyes darkened. He turned, nodding once to his men. Take him. Loki allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk. They did not know it, but they had already lost. The ship had once been a war machine. Now it was a tomb. The halls were lined with torches burning violent flame, casting long shadows against the metal walls. The remnants of Thanos' empire was gathered here, waiting, believing, whispering of his return. Loki walked between them like a phantom, unshaken, unreadable. Every step brought him closer. The doors at the end of the hall opened, and there he was. Thanos sat upon his throne, bathed in firelight, his massive form unmoving, his gaze unreadable. He still had all 6 stones. The golden gauntlet rested on his arm, gleaming in the dim light. He was watching Loki, silent, unmoved, unimpressed. Loki stepped several steps away, head held high. His heart was pounding, but his face showed nothing. Thanos let the silence stretch, as if allowing the moment to crush Loki under his weight. Then he finally spoke. You know, you actually surprised me, trickster. I thought I really killed you. The same words as before. Loki only smiled. You sound disappointed. Thanos' finger drummed once against the arm of his throne. Slow, calculated. You stood before me once, he said, voice a low rumble. You failed, you begged, and now you return? Loki didn't hesitate. To correct my mistake. A slow, deep exhale from Thanos. And what mistake was that? Loki stepped forward, not too close, but just enough to let Thanos see that he did not cower. I fought against my own nature, Loki said smoothly. I thought myself above servitude, above purpose. I was a fool. His fingers unclenched, revealing the time stone glowing in his palm. A gift. A show of loyalty. Thanos' gaze flicked to it, then back to Loki. Still, he did not move. Do you think that earns my favor? Loki tilted his head. It earns your time. And time, Titan, is something I believe you value quite highly. Thanos watched him now. Truly watched him. Loki held still, never breaking eye contact. His life hung on the next few moments. He had one chance, and if Thanos saw through him now, it was over. Loki held his ground, keeping his expression carefully neutral as Thanos studied him. The weight of the Titan's gaze was suffocating, pressing against him like an unseen force, but Loki had long since mastered the art of keeping his face unreadable. He was no fool. He knew that any flicker of hesitation, any misstep, would be the last thing he ever did. For a long, unbearable moment, Thanos did not move. The only sound in the vast chamber was the faint crackle of violent torches lining the walls, casting long, shifting shadows across the ruined throne room. Loki could hear his own heartbeat thudding in his ears, but he stood tall, his hand still outstretched, the time stone gleaming in his palm like an offering to a god. Then, finally, Thanos moved. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward on his throne, resting his massive forearms on his knees. The golden infinity gauntlet glinted as he flexed his fingers once, the motion lazy, almost absent. His deep rumbling voice echoed in the chamber, low and measured. "You would offer me a gift," Thanos said, his gaze flickering to the stone, then back to Loki's face. "Yet the last time you stood before me, you failed to deliver what you promised. You failed to conquer a world that I already handed to you. You failed me." He dipped his head just slightly. "I was blinded by arrogance," he admitted smoothly. "I thought myself greater than I was. I believed I could take Midgard with brute force alone. That was my mistake, and I have paid for it." Thanos watched him in silence, his gaze unreadable, as if weighing every syllable. Then, slowly, he rose from his throne. The sheer size of him was staggering. Even after standing before him once before, Loki felt that deep, primal instinct that whispered danger. He swallowed it down, keeping his stance as relaxed as Thanos stepped closer, closing the space between them. "And now you return," Thanos said, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. "Not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as a beggar with a trinket." Loki lifted his chin, letting a small smirk tug at the corners of his lips. "A trinket, yes," he said, "but one you require." There it was, a flicker of something in Thanos' eyes. Not trust, not belief, but curiosity. Loki pressed forward before the moment could slip away. "You have seen the cracks forming, haven't you?" he said, tilting his head just slightly. "The Avengers, broken, but not defeated. They scheme, they whisper, they gather. You gave them a universe at peace, and they spit on your generosity. They would undo it all, given the chance." Thanos remained still, but his fingers stopped drumming against the gauntlet. Loki stepped closer, just within arm's reach now. It was a calculated risk, but one he felt he had to take. He lifted the time stone slightly, letting its glow reflect the deep ridges of the Titan's face. "They are desperate," Loki continued, lowering his voice to something smooth. "Desperate men do foolish things. I have watched them scramble, searching for any means to take back what was lost, and I have watched them fail." He let the words settle before adding, "But in their failure, they have left me an opening." Thanos narrowed his eyes. "An opening?" Loki smiled, just a flicker of amusement at the edges of his lips. "I can break them." The words hung in the air, heavy with purpose. Loki let them breathe, let Thanos turn them over in his mind. He had done his research. He knew what the Titan valued, how he thought, how he saw the universe. Thanos had never been one to waste resources, and he understood the power of deception just as well as Loki did. Slowly, finally, Thanos reached out. Loki forced himself not to tense as the massive golden hand closed over the time stone, plucking it from his palm as easily as one might take a coin. The stone pulsed once, as if resisting, before settling in his grasp. Thanos studied it for a long moment, then let his eyes return to Loki. "And why should I trust you?" Loki did not hesitate. "Because I have nowhere else to go." A long silence stretched between them, the final test. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Thanos let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "You are a liar, Loki." Loki smirked. "That I am." Thanos considered him for a moment longer before turning away, the time stone now resting in his other hand. He moved back towards his throne, his voice carrying over his shoulder. "If you truly wish to prove yourself, then do so." He lowered himself into his seat once more. "You will have your chance soon enough." Loki let out a slow breath, barely noticeable. He had done it. He had stepped into the lion's den, and for now, he still breathed. But he knew better than to believe this was over. No, this was just the beginning. The room was dimly lit, the violent glow of torches casting jagged shadows across the cold, metallic walls. The remnants of Thanos' forces stood at attention, their presence a silent but constant reminder of the power he still had command. Despite their previous loss, they had still not scattered, they had not fled. They were here, waiting for their master's next move. Loki stood among them, hands clasped behind his back, posture relaxed but mind racing. He had played this game before, the game of survival, the game of deception. But this time, the stakes were higher. This time, there was no second chance. At the head of the room, seated upon the throne that once belonged to a conqueror, Thanos watched him with the slow, calculated gaze of a predator who knew the kill was inevitable. His posture was easy, one elbow resting against the armrest of the throne, his fingers tapping idly against the golden gauntlet. The Infinity Stones shimmered faintly in the dim light, their power humming softly, almost inaudible, but undeniably present. Loki knew the illusion of leisure was just that, an illusion. Thanos was never idle. "You have given me another time stone," Thanos rumbled at last, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "A gesture of faith, a step toward redemption. But I do not deal in half measures, trickster." Loki tilted his head, the smirk on his lips carefully measured. "Then allow me to take a full step, great Titan." Thanos exhaled slowly, shifting slightly in his seat. "You speak as if you already anticipated my demands." Loki spread his hands, almost mocking Thanos. "Would you expect anything less?" A faint trace of amusement flickered through Thanos' expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. He had leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "You will prove your loyalty in the only way that matters, by assuring the Avengers are no longer a threat." Loki's fingers twitched behind his back. Expected, but still troubling. He kept his expression neutral. "And how do you propose I do that?" "You will lure them into a trap," Thanos said simply. Loki allowed a small chuckle, shaking his head. A rather bold assumption that they would just come when called. Thanos studied him for a long moment. "Your brother will come." Loki's smirk froze, but only for a fraction of a second. Thanos knew. Of course he did. Despite everything, despite years of betrayal and conflict, Thor still believed in him, still reached for him, and Thanos was going to use that against him. "Summon him," Thanos continued, as if reading Loki's thoughts. "Make him believe you are in danger. Make him believe you need him." Loki forced a smile, with possible amusement. "You have a rather cruel imagination, Titan." Thanos met his gaze, unmoving. "So do you." Silence stretched between them. Loki could feel the eyes of every warrior in the room on him, watching, waiting, anticipating his answer. He let the silence linger for just a moment longer before inclining his head slightly, an acknowledgement of the command that he had already decided to accept. "And what shall I do once they arrive?" Thanos leaned back, tapping his fingers against the armrest again. "You will ensure they do not leave." The weight of the words settled in Loki's chest. He knew what Thanos expected, a slaughter, a final stand that would end with the last remnants of Earth's defenders falling to their knees. But Loki had no intention of allowing that to happen. "Consider it done," he said smoothly. Thanos watched him for a moment longer, as if searching for a crack, a flicker of doubt. Then he gave a slow nod. "Do not disappoint me again, Loki." Loki smirked. Perish the thought. He walked out of the throne room with a long, easy stride. To anyone watching, he was a man confident in his mission, a man who had chosen his side. But as he stepped into the cold corridor beyond, his smirk faded, his expression hardened. Thanos thought he had won, thought Loki had bent the knee for good, but the game was just beginning. A flicker of green light illuminated the center of Avengers HQ. The room was quiet, tense. Most of the team was still reeling from the failure at Vormir, the weight of their losses pressing down like a shadow. Steve was the first to react, straightening at the sudden glow, his instincts flaring. Tony standing nearby, tensed immediately, his jaw tightening, and then Loki stepped into the portal. The reaction was instant. Steve's shield was with his hand in seconds. Tony's nanotech hummed to life, his gauntlet materializing as he instinctively prepared to blast Loki through the wall. But Loki raised his hands, a rare gesture of surrender. His expression wasn't smug or taunting, it was urgent, desperate. "Wait," he said quickly, scanning their faces. "I have no time for your dramatics, you need to listen to me." Thor stepped forward, his grip tightening around Stormbreaker. But his expression wasn't one of anger, it was uncertainty. "Brother?" Loki's gaze flicked to him, and for a moment, something unreadable passed over his face. Then he squared his shoulders, shaking his head. "Thanos isn't waiting for you to strike first. He is preparing for the final blow. I managed to slip away, but I don't know how long before he finds me again." Tony scoffed, taking a step closer. "Oh yeah? How convenient for you." Loki exhaled, turning his focus to Steve instead. "Believe me or don't, but the next move Thanos makes will be the last one. He is done waiting. If you don't act now, he will race you before you even have the chance to fight back." Steve hesitated. His gut told him it was a bad idea. The timing, the urgency, it was too perfect, and yet he could hear the hesitation in Loki's voice, the smallest crack in his confidence. "Where is he?" Steve asked cautiously. Loki stepped aside, and with the flick of his wrist, the portal expanded, revealing a distant battlefield. And standing in the distance, surrounded by his forces, was Thanos. The sight of him was like a hammer to the chest. Thor stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the figure of the Titan, his grip tightening on Stormbreaker. He wanted this. He needed this. But it was Tony who moved first. Without a word, without hesitation, he began moving towards the portal, his face blank, his body tense like a man walking toward the inevitable. Steve caught his arm. "Tony, wait." Tony just wrenched his arm away. "No." His voice calm. Too calm. "This ends now." Steve shot a glance towards Loki. He still didn't trust him, but Thanos was right there, waiting, watching. Loki let out a slow breath, his expression unreadable. "Are you coming or not?" Steve's hands curled into fists. He was looking at Tony, at Thor. He had a choice to make, and in the end, he decided to step forward. The Avengers walked through the portal, and straight into the trap. The moment their feet touched the battlefield, something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The sky above loomed in deep shades of violet and black, an endless void swallowing all light. The metallic ground beneath them stretched for miles, a graveyard of forgotten battles, silent and unwelcoming. And standing in the distance, waiting, was Thanos. His massive frame was still, his posture easy, as if he had been inspecting them. Behind him, his remaining forces lingered in the shadows, unmoving. He did not summon them forward, he did not charge, he simply watched. Thor grabbed his hammer. Steve exhaled slowly, shifting his stance. But Tony didn't stop moving. His breath was even, his steps purposeful as he strode forward, his eyes locked on Thanos. Steve grabbed his arm again. "Tony, wait, move." The word was clipped, hollow, but Steve felt the weight behind it. Tony wasn't waiting anymore. Then from the shadows, Loki emerged. He moved with his usual effortless grace, but something was different. He wasn't smirking, he wasn't taunting them. His expression was neutral, his gaze unreadable as he stepped onto Thanos' side. Thor's stomach tightened. "Loki," he called, voice hesitant. Loki glanced at him but said nothing. A beat of silence stretched between them, then Tony exhaled sharply. "I told you," he muttered. "I told you we shouldn't have trusted him." Thor swallowed, eyes locked onto Loki. "Tell me this isn't real." Loki's lips twitched at the corners, as if amused by the question. "What exactly do you think this is, brother?" A sick feeling curled in Thor's chest. "Loki," Steve warned, stepping forward. "If you're setting us up, now's the time to come clean." Loki tilted his head. "And if I'm not?" Thor's fingers clenched around the handle of Stormbreaker. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't believe it. But Loki was standing right there, beside the Titan, though looking as he belonged there. He didn't know what to think. "Loki," Thor tried again, voice quieter now. Loki met his eyes, and for the fraction of a second, there was something there, something unspoken. Then Thanos stirred. "You came," he said, his voice in a deep rumble. Steve's jaw tensed. "Maybe we wanted to finish what we started." Thanos inclined his head slightly, watching them as if they were an amusing distraction. "Then let's begin." The battle erupted in an instant. Blasts of energy tore through the air as Thanos' forces surged forward. Steve barely had time to raise his shield before he was thrown backward, the impact rattling his bones. Thor met the charge with lightning-infused fury, cutting through the enemy with brutal precision. But Tony didn't care about the fight. His focus never left Thanos. He pushed forward, every calculated strike propelling him closer, but every time he gained ground, another enemy blocked his way. His repulsors fired, sending bodies flying, but he never reached Thanos. Thanos just stood there, watching. Tony's breath was getting heavier, became sharp. His hands shook as he aimed another blast, his body already moving to charge again. He didn't care about the army, didn't care about anything except getting to him. But the battlefield had other plans. A brutal strike from the side caught Thor off guard. The force sent him staggering, his weapon slipping from his grasp. He barely had time to recover before a blade pressed against his throat. And at the other end of it, Loki. Thor froze. The battle blurred around them, fading into the background. In this moment, it was like nothing else existed. Loki's grip on the dagger was steady, his expression unreadable. "You planned this," Thor said, his voice rough. Loki exhaled softly. "What did you expect?" Thor searched his face, his heart pounding. He had always believed there was a line Loki wouldn't cross. He still wasn't sure what to think of the situation. Was he wrong? "Loki," he said again, quieter this time. Loki tilted his head. "This is the part where you start to wonder if I mean it." Thor swallowed hard. Loki leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe I do." Thor wasn't sure anymore. He had spent his life giving Loki the benefit of the doubt, always reaching for him when the world told him to let go. Maybe this time, he had been wrong. The thought cut deeper than any blade. Loki's fingers twitched to the handle of the dagger. Then, the air shifted. Reality itself warped. Thor barely had time to react before Thanos was suddenly there. Not approaching, not walking. He had willed himself closer. Loki turned sharply, but too late. Thanos reached forward, his massive hand closing around nothing. The illusion flickered, dissolving like mist. Loki's real form materialized a few feet away, arms crossed, a lazy smirk playing at his lips. "You almost had me." Thanos' face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Loki lifted a hand, giving the faintest, mocking wave. The portal behind the Avengers expanded, and then they were gone. A small silence fell over the battlefield. Thanos stood still, his hand lingering where Loki had been. Slowly, his fingers curled into a fist, his jaw clenched, his shoulders tensed just slightly, the faintest movement betraying his frustration. His forces remained frozen, awaiting his command. He exhaled slowly, his body rigid with restrained fury. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Of course, when describing all of this, with this being the final Avengers movie in the phase, I would want to draw these fights out longer and then just have them be the spectacle that they were meant to be. As I'm sure honestly you probably figured out, I'm only speaking on what's really necessary. Me explaining to you each punch and kick wouldn't really hit the same, so just keep in mind, if this was actually in development, the fights would be a lot more dragged out, a lot more of, did I say a spectacle? That's probably the right word to use. The Avengers staggered into Avengers HQ, their bodies battered, their minds racing. The battle lasted only minutes, but it had drained them, every single one of them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Thor paced near the center of the room. Steve stood near him, hands on his hips, staring at the ground in deep thought. Tony didn't stop moving. He stormed towards one of the consoles, his mind already racing ahead of the rest of them. "All right," Tony said, voice sharp, breaking the silence. "We need a new plan." Steve inhaled slowly, pushing his exhaustion aside. "A new plan? Tony, we barely made it out of there. Thanos still has the stones." "Yeah, no kidding," Tony snapped, turning to face him. "But we still have some of them too, don't we?" The weight of that truth settled over them. The Time Stone, the Soul Stone. They were incomplete, but they weren't empty-handed. Bruce, rubbing at his temple, let out a tired sigh. "It doesn't matter if we can't use them." Tony turned back to the console, pulling something up. "I've got something for that." Thor narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Tony didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured towards the holographic blueprint appearing on the screen. It was a gauntlet, sleek, metallic, designed to resemble his own suit's technology. "I built this a while back," Tony admitted. "We needed something that wasn't Thanos' oversized oven mitt. A contingency. But then, he exhaled sharply. Things changed." Steve stepped forward, eyes locked onto the new design. "You think this'll work?" Bruce studied the projection, rubbing his chin. "It's got the same nanotech adaptability as your suit. If we could get all the stones," he trailed off, glancing at the others. "Then we bring them back," Tony finished. "All of them." The room was heavy with that possibility. But before anyone could say another word, a portal tore open in the middle of the room. The temperature in the air shifted. A presence they had come to fear now stood before them. Thanos was back. His towering frame emerged through the swirling energy, stepping forward with measured, deliberate movements. His golden armor gleamed under the lights of the facility, the gauntlet still fastened to his hand. His eyes burned with something deeper than rage. Finality. This wasn't the Thanos who had toyed with them before. This was a conqueror done waiting. The Avengers tensed, weapons raised. Thanos stepped forward, flexing his fingers inside the gauntlet. His gaze swept over them like they were insects underfoot. "I gave you a chance," he said, voice calm, almost eerily so. "To leave this universe as it was. You refused." The gauntlet began to glow, the stones igniting with power. "And now," Thanos continued, "I'll take care of you myself." Then he closed his fist. The moment he did, reality shattered. The stones, all of them, began flickering erratically. A strange, pulsing resonance built between them, a distortion they've never seen before. And then, a catastrophic rupture of power emitted from the gauntlet. The energy backlash was not just a shockwave, it was a rupture in reality itself. Avengers HQ collapsed. Steel buckled like paper, entire sections of the facility erupting into flames as the raw power of the stones clashed. A concussive force rippled outward, sending debris flying in every direction. The ground split open beneath them, warping like molten metal, distorting into fragments of past and future. The very air crackled, glitching in and out of existence, flickering between the ruins of what was and the echoes of what could be. For a fraction of a second, the battlefield wasn't just here, it was everywhere. And then, the gauntlet broke. A violent surge of energy ripped through Thanos' arms, sending him staggering. Sparks of raw cosmic power leapt from the seams, and the gauntlet cracked, its surface burning with unstable energy. Then, the stones ejected themselves. One by one, they were expelled from the gauntlet, scattering like meteors across the battlefield. Tony whipped his head around. "The stones!" Steve was already moving, diving towards the nearest glowing ember. Thor did the same, his grip closing around just another before the ground gave way beneath him. But as the chaos unfolded, Loki didn't move for the stones. He moved for Thanos. The Titan groaned, attempting to push himself up, but something was wrong. His vision blurred, his body sluggish, the gauntlet felt heavier. Loki had him. The illusion wove itself seamlessly onto Thanos' consciousness, curling around him like an unseen shadow. To Thanos, Avengers HQ was still standing. The battlefield was unchanged. The Avengers were still there, staring him down. He clenched his fists, and nothing happened. He frowned, he turned, and Steve was standing there, watching him. Thanos lunged forward, reaching for him. Steve disappeared, like a dust blowing away in the wind. Thanos' breath slowed. Behind him, Tony stood. Thanos turned. Tony didn't move. "Something wrong?" Tony asked. Thanos narrowed his eyes. "You think this changes anything?" Tony tilted his head. "I think you're confused." Thanos exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He was done playing this game. "Your illusions won't save you." He swung a fist, and Tony shattered. His image broke apart like glass, fragments spiraling into the air before dissolving into mist. Loki's voice then echoed, low and taunting. "Strange, isn't it?" Thanos turned, but the room warped around him. The walls stretched and flickered, twisting in a way that shouldn't be possible. He swung the gauntlet, attempting to reassert his control over reality, and it didn't respond. A cold realization settled into his bones. He looked down. The gauntlet was empty. His nostrils flared, his hands clenching into fists. The illusion collapsed, revealing the true battlefield. And in the distance, Steve, Tony, and Thor stood, their stones all in their grasp. Loki staggered, his breath coming sharp. The effort had drained him, but he had done what was needed. Thanos' presence then darkened. The battlefield felt heavier, like a storm was about to break. Then, in a single moment of raw, burning rage, Thanos rose. Lightning roared from across the battlefield, illuminating the wreckage of Avengers HQ in a jagged, blinding flash. Thor moved first. Stormbreaker sliced through the air, propelled by his fury. The weight of his failures, the grief that had burned within him since the day on the Asgardian refugee ship, all of it coiled into a single strike. He wouldn't hesitate this time. Thanos barely had time to react before the first hit connected, a brutal, bone-rattling blow to his side. The Titan staggered, the force really making him feel it. But he didn't fall. Instead, Thanos turned with unnerving calm. His hand shot forward, catching Thor's wrist mid-swing, stopping him cold. For a split second, their eyes met. "Still seeking vengeance, little god?" Thanos said. Thor snarled back at him, wrenching free and swinging again. This time Thanos dodged, his movements precise, calculated. He countered with a devastating punch to Thor's ribs, the impact sending him skidding back across the ruined battlefield. But before either could attack again, a new surge of energy erupted behind them. The air heated intensely. A golden, searing glow washed over the battlefield, expanding outward like an inferno. Hulk's voice tore through the chaos. Now! Bruce, still shaking from the strain, forced his trembling hand forward. The snap echoed like a thunder. The flash of pure, blinding white light consumed everything. The power was overwhelming. Hulk's massive form convulsed as the raw energy of the Infinity Stone surged through his body. His skin darkened with burns, his muscles locked in place. But he held on. For a moment, everything stood still. The battlefield, once an arena of fire and destruction, felt eerily quiet. The crackling embers in the distance, the sound of debris settling. It was as if time itself was holding its breath. Bruce collapsed onto his knees, panting. His right arm hung limp, burned and barely responding. Did it work? Steve muttered, still catching his breath. No one had an answer. Then a low rumble filled the air. At first it seemed like an aftershock, just another collapse of the already ruined base. But then the sky darkened, the ground quivered, and above them, dozens of glowing portals began to open. A pulse of energy radiated from the horizon, and in the distance, Thanos' fleet materialized. Warships, massive in scale, loomed over the battlefield like shadows of an unstoppable force. Then, with a single motion, Thanos raised his hand. The order was given. From the portals, his army began to descend, thousands upon thousands of warriors, creatures of war and destruction, filling the air with their deafening roars. The Black Order, towering leviathans, legions of the Chitauri, all pouring through the breach like a tidal wave. Thanos watched as his forces surged forward, marching toward their final victory. With a grim, satisfied expression, he turned his gaze back to the Avengers. This time, he said, I will finish it. The battlefield was in ruins. Ash and embers drifted in the air, casting a dull glow over the shattered remains of Avengers HQ. Smoke curled in the distance, thick and unmoving, as if the world itself had stopped to witness what was about to unfold. But through the wreckage, he was still there. Thanos sat at the center of it all, waiting. He had taken his time placing his massive, double-edged blade onto the ground beside him. His posture relaxed, shoulders squared, not with exhaustion, but with patience. His face, often so unreadable, was calm. He was watching, not moving, not speaking, just waiting. Beyond him, his army was still arriving. Warships were descending in the distance, streaking through the sky like falling stars. On the ground, legions of soldiers were marching into position, their silhouettes growing larger by the second. But none of them mattered. Not yet, because right now, there was only one enemy sitting there, and three men standing in front of him. Tony, Steve, and Thor. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. They knew this was it. Their boots crunched against the broken ground as they stepped forward together, side by side. Thor rolled his shoulders, gripping both the hammer and Stormbreaker in each hand. The electricity flickered at his fingertips, his eyes glowing faintly beneath the weight of the power coursing through him. Steve moved in step with him, his shield strapped to his arm, muscles wound tight, ready. And Tony, blood on his lip, armor scratched and dented, was already calculating 1,000 different ways this could go. None of them ended well, but that didn't matter. They walked, step by step, towards inevitability. Thanos' gaze flickered between them, his hands resting idly on his knees. He didn't react. He didn't adjust his position. He just watched. Then, he moved. With a slow, deliberate ease, he rose to his feet, standing at his full height. He reached for his blade, pulling it from the ground, the metal scraping against the stone beneath him. You could not live with your own failure, he said, his voice even, almost conversational. His fingers curled around the hilt of his weapon, turning it in his grasp. And where did that bring you? His gaze settled back on Tony. Back to me. Tony looked at him. He exhaled slowly. Thor adjusted the grip on his weapons, rolling his wrists. Steve didn't hesitate. They charged. Now, I know this is the climax of the rewrite, but I have to come in with a pause. I'm sorry. From here, everything in this next little bit will take place exactly as it did with Endgame. I wanted to keep that iconic walk with Tony, Thor, and Steve that they had. It was one of my all-time favorite moments in the entirety of the MCU. I thought it was perfect. The battle with all three of them was perfect. Cap getting the moment with Thor's hammer was amazing, and Cap standing alone with the hammer by himself, standing by the army with all of the on your left thing, all of the Avengers coming to the portal, Avengers assembling. It was all beyond perfect. So, all of this, and I forget if I just mentioned Cap with the hammer, all of that will remain unchanged, but we aren't done yet. The Avengers will charge just as they did, and I want to emphasize on everyone having their own little moments. I want to bring a little bit more to what Endgame did, just like things like Drax yelling, Ant-Man getting giant having his moment. All of those things that we saw and loved, with the exception of a couple things like of Gamora, of course. The only other thing that I want to emphasize is the moment with Tony and Peter reuniting. While that was also perfect, it was massively emotional. I want to perhaps drag it on just a little bit more, the hug just a little bit longer. That made me just choke up on the inside. But speaking of that same moment, everything will continue just as it did up until that moment. We are going to continue this rewrite after the moment Iron Man and Peter end up hugging each other, reuniting. Peter blinked, his rambling cut short as the reality of the moment settled in. His breath hitched, and for a split second, the battlefield around them disappeared, but only for a second. A deafening crash rippled through the air. The ground shook violently as a massive Leviathan plummeted from the sky, its body smashing into the ruins of Avengers HQ. Nearby, Hulk barely had time to react. Still cradling his blackened, burnt arm, his body was already at its limit. The aftershock of the creature's landing shredded through the ground beneath him, knocking him off balance. The gauntlet slipped. For a moment, it hovered midair, flipping end over end. The golden metal caught the flickering light of fire and chaos. Then it hit the ground. A beat of silence. Then, the Outriders saw it. A screech cut through the battlefield as the first creature lunged. Hulk roared, forcing himself forward, but his body wouldn't move fast enough. He reached out, his massive fingers just brushing the edge of the gauntlet. An arrow whizzed through the air, piercing the Outrider right in the head. Its body slumped into the dirt, motionless. A hand darted out, snatching the gauntlet before another creature could reach it. Hawkeye. Breathing heavily, Clint stared down the artifact in his grasp. His fingers clenched around the golden metal. He knew what this meant. He didn't hesitate. He ran. The gauntlet relay had begun. Now, for this relay of the gauntlet with everybody passing it around, the fun moments with each Avenger, I want it relatively unchanged. Hawk giving it up to a bunch of different Avengers before leading up to Peter was really fun. For the most part, this scene is going to be left completely unchanged. When we stop following the gauntlet is where I want to continue interrupting this with this rewrite. And I'm sorry that I keep doing this. I don't know if it's ruining the flow of things. I feel like it'd be best to explain it to you instead of just reading off to you exactly what happened in Endgame 1-for-1. I'm sure I'm already taking up enough of your time. The battlefield was chaos. The relentless clash of warriors, the crackling energy of the gauntlet, the war cries of thousands. Yet, in this moment, for Wanda Maximoff, it all faded into silence. Her vision tunneled as she locked onto Thanos. He stood at the center of the devastation, issuing commands, his massive blade still slick with the blood of her allies. The man responsible for all of it. The man who tore her world apart. She landed softly, her crimson energy rippling in the air like embers caught in the wind. He turned, sensing the shift. She could see the moment he recognized her, not just as another enemy, but as something more. His stance adjusted slightly, his fingers curling around the handle of his broken weapon, preparing for a fight. "You," she breathed, the weight of everything she had lost pressing onto her chest. His gaze was steady, cold, but there was no smugness, no arrogance. He regarded her with something almost unreadable. "You took everything from me." Thanos exhaled slowly, tilting his head. He did not sneer, did not laugh. He simply watched her, as if measuring her, before replying, "And yet you still stand." Then he attacked. Wanda did not let him get close. With a snarl, she flung out her hands. Red energy lashed through the air, catching Thanos mid-stride and hurling him backward. He smashed through the remains of the Leviathan carcass, crumbling metal and shattered bone collapsing around him. Before he could rise, she yanked him back with her power. His body jerked violently, dragged through the air as if an invisible hand had wrapped around his throat. Thanos gritted his teeth, fighting against the force, but she was stronger now. The pain, the grief, the rage, it all fueled her. "You're going to die here," she whispered, tightening her grip. Thanos struggled, his muscles straining, his fingers flexed, reaching for his blade, but before he could react, Wanda ripped the weapon from his grasp and sent it spinning away, embedding it deep into the earth. Her hands trembled as her energy wrapped around his armor, crushing it inward. Metal groaned under the pressure, his breath in his lungs hitched as the force squeezed tighter. He let out a roar of defiance and lunged at her, even as his body crumpled under her hold. But just before he reached her, lightning split the sky. A golden, white blast of raw energy slammed into Thanos' chest and sent him skidding across the battlefield. He trembled through dirt and wreckage before rolling to a stop, his body steaming from the impact. Through the smoke, Thor descended. His armor, once battered, now gleamed with divine fury. His red cape billowed behind him as Stormbreaker crackled in his grasp. His expression was unreadable, except for the fire in his eyes. Thanos, coughing, lifted his head, and for the first time since he arrived, his face twisted with something close to recognition. Thor's voice was like a distant thunder. "You're not the only one with a score to settle." Then he changed. Stormbreaker clashed with Thanos' gauntlet-covered forearm, the impact sending shockwaves rippling outward. Sparks danced between them as Thor swung again, his axe searing through the battlefield in a streak of lightning. Thanos barely dodged, twisting his body, but Wanda was already behind him. Before he could react, she sent a blast of chaos magic straight into his spine. He staggered forward, right into Thor's next swing. The axe buried itself deep into his shoulder. Thanos let out a snarl in pain, swiping wildly at Thor, who pulled the weapon free and spun away before the blow could land. Wanda wasn't finished. With a flick of her wrist, the ground beneath Thanos split open. Red energy crackled across his skin, lifting him into the air. He struggled, but her power was unrelenting. She was breaking him. Thanos felt a snap. His gauntlet bent inward. His body shook violently as she poured everything into him. Thor watched from below, chest heaving, grip tightening on his axe. This was it. This was the moment. Thanos clawed the air, his growls turning into strained gasps. His fingers twitched, grasping for something, anything. And then, his expression changed. A flicker of realization. Wanda felt it before she saw it. A deep rumble, the shifting of something massive. Thanos' lips curled into a strained smirk. His voice, though hoarse, was steady. Fire. The sky exploded. A barrage of energy blasts rained down from above, lighting the battlefield in an inferno of devastation. Wanda barely had time to react before she was forced to break her hold, throwing up a shield just as the first blast hit. Thanos dropped from the air, collapsing onto one knee. His body was wrecked, his armor shattered, his arm limp at his side. But he was alive. Thor took a step towards him, gripping his axe. But a blast struck the ground near his feet, sending him skidding backwards. More fire, more devastation. Thanos slowly pushed himself up, rolling his shoulder back into place as he exhaled. His breathing was heavy, ragged, but he was still standing. His eyes flickered upward as the barrage continued. His army pressed the assault. He had bought himself time, and now it was only a matter of taking back what was his. Scarlet Witch giving her short-lived revenge on Thanos was one of the best pieces in cinema I have ever seen, and I wanted to keep it. But I particularly loved changing this to a team-up with both of them, with her and Thor, because neither of them never had a proper fight or revenge moment with Thanos, and personally, while the original moment was pretty perfect, I actually think that I improved upon it a little bit. And as always, guys, I'd love to know what you think about it down below. As we continue along with this gauntlet relay, okay, I also want Captain Marvel's arrival unchanged. The ship pointing at the sky, Denver slicing absolutely through it, coming down and taking the gauntlet from Peter. I thought this had potential, but they ruined it in two ways, okay? The first being that cringe girl power scene. It sucked. I want that scrapped completely. Infinity War did their girl power scene perfectly fine. Nobody noticed, and it wasn't absolutely cringe. This moment took me completely out of Endgame in that moment. They're lucky that the scenes that followed it were like beyond perfect. The second change that I want to make is I want to make this entire fight with Thanos in general. I get that Captain Marvel is super powerful. I get it. But my heart dropped when watching this because they made her look like that she was kind of about to save the day. I was like, oh no, we saw the cringe girl power scene. Now Captain Marvel's busting forward. It can't be her. It has to be Thor, Steve, Tony, anybody else. This at the time did not feel earned, and I thought that she had a little bit too much of the spotlight. I like her coming. I like her introduction in Endgame. I like how it was set up, but it was too much. So I wanted to change this along with the addition to the story that actually was the entire idea that I had in mind that inspired this entire rewrite. Captain Marvel streaked across the battlefield. The gauntlet clutched tightly in her grip. Each Infinity Stone pulsed with untamed energy, radiating power that could change the universe in an instant. She was almost there. The quantum van was in sight. Thanos saw it too. His grip tightened around the hilt of his blade. With a furious roar, he launched the massive sword across the battlefield. It spun violently, cutting through debris, tearing through the air with the force of a missile. Carol braced, but it wasn't aimed at her. The blade sliced through the quantum van, embedding itself deep into its core. And then, detonation. The van erupted in a fiery explosion, sending shockwaves of energy ripping across the battlefield. Carol was knocked off course, the impact forcing her backward. The gauntlet slipped from her grasp, trembling through the air, and landed right at Thanos' feet. The Mad Titan lunged forward, snatching it up, his massive fingers curled around its golden frame. He had it. He could end this. He lifted his arm, preparing to snap his fingers. A streak of red and gold shot toward him at full speed. Tony Stark. "Not today, you purple son of a..." Before he could finish, Thanos struck. The back of his massive fist collided with Tony's armor, swatting him away like an insect. The impact sent him crashing to the ground, his body skidding through the rubble. His HUD flickered with red warnings. His vision blurred. The taste of blood filled his mouth. But he wasn't done. He still had another move left. Laying in the dirt, barely able to breathe, Tony's trembling fingers swiped at his suit's interface. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to move. His HUD blinked, highlighting a hidden protocol buried deep beneath the interface. A file name appeared. Titan Blood Sample, Project Drop. Tony's lips twitched, a bitter smirk forming despite the pain. All that for a drop of blood. He barely had the strength to say it, but it played in his head as clear as the day it happened, the moment Thanos bled. The only moment. He tapped the command, execute. Inside the suit, something activated. A microscopic wave of nanotech pulsed outward, traveling from his chest piece, through the battlefield, and straight into the gauntlet. It grew as it flew. The moment Thanos wrapped his fingers around it, the countermeasure detonated inside the bloodstream. The effect was instant. His veins blackened. His skin rippled unnaturally, glitching in and out of focus. At a microscopic level, the nanites had latched onto his blood cells, surging through his body like an infection. His muscles seized, his chest tightened. The Titan's own body was betraying him. Thanos staggered. A deep shudder ran through his frame, his grip on the gauntlet faltering, his breathing hitched, his body refusing to obey. Carol saw it and she lunged. Her fist collided with his jaw, sending him reeling. Before he could recover, she grabbed the gauntlet, forcing his fingers apart, struggling to rip it from his grasp. Thanos roared, his muscles straining as he fought against her, but his body was slowing. His mind was clouding. The blood countermeasure was working. Carol drove her knee into his chest, shoving him backward. Thanos dug his heels into the dirt, barely managing to hold his ground. His free hand twitched, his fingers curled into a tight, shaking fist. And then he powered through. With one last surge of will, he forced his body to move. With a snarl, he reached toward the gauntlet and tore the Power Stone free. For a single moment, the battlefield lit up in a violet fury. Carol barely had time to react before Thanos clenched his fist and swung. The unfiltered blast of cosmic energy connected. Carol's body rocketed backward, tearing through the wreckage, disappearing into the distance. Silence. Thanos exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His vision was hazy. His muscles still trembled from whatever invaded his bloodstream. But he had won for this second. His eyes flickered right towards Tony, and for the first time, he looked angry, angrier than we've ever seen him before. His hand trembled as he slotted the Power Stone back into the gauntlet. The battle wasn't over, not yet. The battlefield was breaking, not from the war, not from the chaos of the battle, but from something deeper, more unnatural. A sudden, sickening shift in the air made Tony's blood run cold. Something was wrong. Across the field, Thanos lifted his hand, but he wasn't snapping, not yet. His fingers curled around the Time Stone, its emerald glow pulsating, twisting, unraveling reality in reverse. Everything slowed. Then, time rewound. The energy Tony had just unleashed vanished. The molecular corruption spreading through Thanos' body never happened. The blood, the pain, the weakness, gone. And this time, when Tony's microscopic countermeasure reached him, Thanos saw it coming. His other hand clenched into a fist, and in an instant, the gauntlet's power erased the nanotech attack before it could even reach his skin. Tony stared in horror. It was like it had never happened. Thanos exhaled, rolling his shoulders, now fully in control again. The burning agony he had felt was a distant memory. His eyes went back on Tony, and for the first time, he was filled with rage. Then something hit him, a blast. It was quick, desperate. Thanos turned, just in time to see Star-Lord charging at him, guns raised, pulling the trigger over and over. "Not again, you purple psychopath," Peter yelled. Every shot bounced harmlessly off Thanos' skin. Thanos barely reacted. Then, without a word, he caught Star-Lord by the throat. Peter choked, struggling against his grip. Thanos didn't crush his windpipe. He didn't kill him. He just stared. A long, slow breath left his lips. Enough. Then, without hesitation, time stopped. The battlefield froze. Every Avenger, every warrior, every soldier. They stood like statues. locked in place, their final movements frozen in the echoes of war. Only two remained untouched: Tony, Peter, and now they were alone with Thanos. Not far away, Doctor Strange's hand snapped up. He recognized the flow of magic, the shift in time itself. No. With the quick twist of his fingers, golden sigils formed around him, expanding outwards in a protective dome. Steve barely had time to react before the energy warped around him. Then, Bucky. The moment the shield settled, the magic erased their presence from the frozen world around them. Thanos' head didn't turn. He didn't sense them. "Don't move," Strange said, voice low, urgent. "Whatever you do, don't let him notice us." Steve's breathing was tight, controlled. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Bucky clenched his fists. Something was coming. Something terrible. Then, across the battlefield, Thanos turned to Tony and Peter, and they vanished. The battlefield vanished with it. No war, no destruction, only silence. Tony and Peter stood alone in the vast emptiness of the soul world. The horizon stretched endlessly, bathed in a deep, suffocating orange glow. The air was thick, unnatural, pressing down on them like an unseen force. It was just them, no armor, no weapons, nothing but themselves. Then, a voice. "Look at what you've done." They turned. Thanos stood before them. No armor, no gauntlet, yet he was more terrifying than ever. His expression was different, not cold, not calculated. Rage. "You could have accepted balance," he said, his voice low and steady. "But instead, you defy the natural order, again and again." Tony looked back at him. "Natural order? You kidnapped my daughter, you sick bastard." Thanos ignored him. His eyes settled on Star-Lord. "You remind me of her." Star-Lord's chest tightened. He didn't need to ask who. Gamora. Thanos' expression darkened. "She was meant to stay dead, and yet you fight for her, just as Stark fights for his child." His shoulders rose and fell in controlled, seething breaths. "You don't see it yet, the damage you've caused, the ripple you've sent through this universe." Star-Lord's fist tightened. "We just wanted our families back." "At what cost?" Thanos lifted a hand. The sky rippled above them. Images flickered in the air. Flashes of destruction, war, worlds consumed by chaos. "You think you've won?" Thanos' voice rumbled with fury. "You think your return to normal hasn't tipped the scales yet again?" Tony's pulse pounded in his ears. "You're just pissed because you lost. We brought everyone back." Thanos' gaze snapped to him. "You took everything from me. My purpose, my future, and now you will understand the cost of defying me, and you will have to experience everything over again once we leave this world." A deep movement shook the reality beneath them. Then, golden light erupted from the sky, cascading down in the distance, forming a barrier. Tony and Peter both staggered back, and behind it, Morgan and Gamora. Peter's lungs locked up. Gamora was right there. "Peter!" Gamora's voice was desperate, frantic. Her fist slammed against the barrier. Morgan was screaming. Her heart shattered. She was terrified. "Daddy!" Tony reached towards the barrier. "Morgan!" Her tiny hands pounded against the golden wall. "Daddy, please, 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 Daddy." She was sobbing uncontrollably. Gamora turned to Star-Lord. "Peter, you have to save me. You have to save us. Come now." Thanos watched them. "A soul for a soul. One of you may reach them. The other will be erased forever." A beat of silence. Then, Star-Lord moved. He ran for Gamora. Tony grabbed him, yanking him back with all of his strength. "No." Star-Lord ripped away from him, furious. "I'm sorry. I have to." "I do too." Tony's voice broke. Behind them, Morgan screamed louder, pounding her tiny fists against the barrier, desperate for her father. Behind them, Gamora begged Peter not to leave her behind. And then, Star-Lord lunged. Tony blocked him. The fight began. The world outside remained frozen. The battle had not moved. The army stood still, locked mid-charge. Their weapons raised yet motionless, as if time itself had been shattered. Steve felt his pulse hammering in his chest. His finger twitched over the straps of his shield, his mind racing through what he had just witnessed. Bucky, standing beside him, stared at the air in front of them, his breathing heavy. And strange, he had not moved. His hands were still lifted in precise formation, his cloak eerily still. But his face told the story. Steve turned to him. "What the hell just happened?" Strange inhaled sharply through his nose, but he didn't look away from the rippling orange glow still surrounding them. "Thanos used the Soul Stone." Strange finally turned toward them. He He didn't just trap Stark and Quill in there, he forced them into a choice, a sacrifice. He hesitated for only a moment. It was an execution disguised as balance. Steve exhaled hard. So what can we do? Strange hesitated. Then, he lifted his palm. In the center of his hand, the second soul stone glowed faintly. Steve's eyes widened. How? Strange's expression remained unreadable. I took it during the chaos, just before the gauntlet was damaged. Bucky looked at him, brow furrowed. Does Thanos know? Strange shook his head. He never noticed. He was too focused on using his and wiping us out. Steve's gaze flickered between Strange and the stone, his voice quieter now. So what does that mean? Strange closed his fingers over the gem. It means I can take us there. Steve straightened. Inside, Strange's hands shifted, the magic in his fingertips illuminating. We won't be able to change anything. I will bring you there as a spectator, not to interfere. Bucky's jaw tightened. Then why go? Strange met his gaze, his voice lower. Because I think you need to see it. The space around them began to distort. The battlefield didn't change, but something else did. Steve and Bucky felt it before they saw it, like an unseen door had been opened, yet no one inside could hear it creak. A slow, suffocating wave of heat settled over them. The world around them dimmed, the color draining, leaving only a faint, burning glow of orange mist curling along the ground. They had entered the soul world, but they were shadows, ghosts that ghosts even couldn't see. Strange's voice was distant now, a whisper against reality itself. We are observers, nothing more. And then they saw it. Tony and Peter, on the ground, gasping for air, bloodied and beaten. Morgan was still screaming, pounding her tiny fists against a golden barrier, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Gamora's voice was breaking, her desperate cries laced with exhaustion. The fight had grown worse, desperate, animalistic. Steve's stomach twisted. This wasn't a battle. This was survival. The silence of the soul world made it worse. Every breath, every impact, every gasp, it was deafening. Tony and Peter were no longer thinking. It was instinct, fury, desperation. They grappled, their bodies slamming into the cold, barren ground beneath them. There was no battlefield here, no distractions, just pain. Peter landed a savage blow to Tony's ribs. The impact forced the air from his lungs, a choked grunt escaping his throat. But Tony wasn't down yet. He snapped his head forward, smashing it against Peter's face. Peter staggered, blood sprang from his nose. The fight wasn't clean. It was survival. Tony's fist crashed into Peter's side, then his jaw, then his temple. Peter grunted, dazed, stumbling. But Tony was running out of strength, and Star-Lord saw it. He lunged, his shoulder ramming into Tony's stomach, tackling him onto the ground. They hit the wet ground hard, rolling, clawing, fighting for any sort of leverage they could get. Tony gritted his teeth, forcing his forearm against Peter's throat, trying to choke him out. Peter's fingers clawed at Tony's wrist, gasping, kicking, his legs thrashing in the water. They weren't men anymore. They were animals. And all the while, Morgan screamed. Her tiny fist slammed against the golden barrier still, her voice cracking with terror. Tony hesitated for a moment, and that was all Peter needed. He shoved Tony off of him, flipping their positions, straddling his chest. His fist hammered down. 1. Tony's skull cracked against the ground. 2. His vision blurred, blood filling his mouth. 3. Peter's knuckles split open, raw from the force. Bucky didn't want to watch anymore. He saw the way Tony struggled beneath Peter's weight, his body barely responding. He saw how Star-Lord's knuckles bled, his chest heaving, torn between fury and despair. He saw Morgan, screaming herself hoarse, her tiny hands still slamming against the barrier separating her from her father. And in that moment, Bucky knew. There was only one way this ended. His voice was steady. Send me in. Strange didn't hesitate. He didn't argue. He didn't question it. Because he understood. He saw this. Steve turned to Bucky, his breath catching. Buck! Bucky's eyes didn't waver. This is the only way. You know it. Steve stared at him with his jaw tightening. His throat worked around the words he couldn't find. Bucky's fingers clenched at his sides. We were never supposed to make it out of this war. Steve swallowed hard. That was a long time ago. Bucky gave a faint, tired smile. Not for me. Steve's chest ached. Of all the times he had fought to save Bucky, all the battles, all the losses, all the years spent pulling him back from the edge, and now, Bucky was stepping over it himself. But this wasn't Hydra's doing. This wasn't control. This was his choice. Bucky exhaled, his fingers reached for Steve's shoulder, a familiar grip. one Steve had felt since Brooklyn. Steve's eyes burned. Bucky gave a final squeeze, then turned to Strange. "Do it." Strange closed his eyes, the second soul stone in his palm glowed, and with a blinding burst of golden night, Bucky Barnes was gone. The world around them blurred with exhaustion, pain, rage, tears. Tony's vision was swimming. His body was barely responding. Star-Lord's fists were sick with blood, his breath ragged and uneven, his eyes filled with tears. They were past words, past hesitation. This was pure animalistic survival. And then Bucky Barnes appeared. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't stop to take in the horror of what he had walked into. He sprinted past Tony and Peter without a second thought. Peter saw him first, his fist still raised, ready to swing down again. His eyes widened, his body locking up. Tony caught the movement too, blinking through the blood and haze. A part of them wanted to react, to stop him, to understand. But Bucky was already gone. He ran straight for Morgan. Thanos' gaze snapped towards him. His jaw tensed, his fingers flexed, trying to will movement into them. He couldn't. The gauntlet was gone. For the first time in a long time, Thanos was powerless. Morgan's sobs had become hiccups of fear, her tiny frame trembling. Then suddenly, Bucky was there. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, holding her like he had always been meant to. Morgan's hands clutched his shirt, tiny fingers curling into the fabric. Her big, wet eyes looked up at him. Bucky exhaled slowly, then he lifted his gaze to Tony. Both their eyes met. Bucky nodded, just once, a soldier giving his final orders. Tony knew immediately. His fingers loosened, his body, once wound so tight with rage and desperation, finally relaxed. His voice was nothing more than a whisper. "Go." Peter gasped for breath, turning. Gamora was still trapped, her hands pressed against the barrier, watching everything unfold with wide, frantic eyes. Peter didn't blink, he just ran. His fingers collided with the energy wall, and it shattered. Gamora fell forward, landing against him. Peter caught her, breathless, heart pounding. Morgan disappeared into a soft, golden glow, and Bucky Barnes was gone. A blinding flash of golden light erupted across the soul world, and then everything changed. No battlefield, no screams, no chaos, just silence. The golden glow dimmed, and three figures stood alone in the vast emptiness. Doctor Strange, Steve Rogers, and Bucky Barnes. Steve's breath hitched, his chest seized, his hands trembling. Bucky was still here. "Buck?" Bucky turned, his expression calm, resigned. Steve took a shaky step forward. "You're okay. But Bucky shook his head. "Not exactly." Steve froze. Strange exhaled. "We don't have much time." Steve's gaze snapped to him, desperate, pleading. "Fix this." Strange's eyes were heavy, filled with something Steve had never seen before. Guilt. "I can't." Steve's throat tightened, his hands curled into fists. Strange took out a deep breath. "The second soul stone was never meant to exist. When I took it, I stole it without a trade. It was broken, incomplete. That imbalance can't exist. Someone had to restore it." Steve's stomach dropped. "No." Bucky watched him carefully. "Steve." "No!" Steve's voice cracked. Bucky took a step forward, extending a hand. Steve's fingers shook as he reached for it. Their hands clasped, firm, like old times. And then, Bucky pulled him to a hug. Steve broke. His grip tightened, fingers clutching Bucky's jacket, refusing to let go. "Stay." Bucky's hand came up to the back of Steve's head, holding him close. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You gotta let me go, Stevie." Steve shook his head against Bucky's shoulder, and Bucky exhaled. Then softly, he stepped back. Steve's hands lingered, gripping at his arms like if he held on hard enough, he could pull him back. But Bucky only smiled. Steve's breath hitched. "You deserved more, Buck." Bucky's eyes gleamed with unshed tears. "I had enough." Strange took a measured breath. His hands rose, fingers tracing golden runes in the air. The energy from the soul stone swirled, wrapping around Bucky like a gentle wave. Bucky turned one last time, his eyes locked onto Steve's. Then, he was gone. The roar of the war crashed right back into existence. The battlefield was still a chaotic storm of destruction. Bodies clashed, the ground trembled under the weight of the giants, ships fired from above, and heroes pushed forward, fighting with everything they had. But amidst the endless battle, Gamora stood frozen. She had returned, and she wasn't alone. Peter Quill had her by the wrist, his breathing ragged, his face torn between disbelief and overwhelming relief. Alongside was Morgan, confused, but more settled. Morgan didn't understand what was happening. She only knew her father wasn't there. Gamora swallowed, her hands clenching in a fist as she turned towards the battlefield, and then her eyes locked onto him. Thanos, still standing, still breathing, still reaching for his throne, a titan who refused to die. Thanos moved with purpose. Gamora and Peter hid Morgan from all of the destruction around them. They turned, kept her safe. With a slow, deliberate motion, Thanos reached towards the Power Stone. His fingers curled around it, and as he placed it back into the gauntlet, a surge of energy erupted through his body. The raw, devastating force of the stones coursed through him, his veins igniting with unstoppable power. His eyes lifted, a storm of rage and satisfaction burning behind them. It was over. He had won. Thanos tightened his grip. The gauntlet hummed with power. And then, across the battlefield, he saw him. Iron Man. Bloody. Barely standing, but still there. And behind him, Doctor Strange. The sorcerer stood silent, unwavering. His face remained calm, but his hand, a single finger lifted. The same finger that had signaled fate itself. The moment everything had been leading toward. Tony exhaled sharply. The weight of the universe pressed against him. His body screamed for relief, for mercy, for rest. But there was no more time. There was only one choice. This was the one chance they had at succeeding. Tony's heart pounded. His body ached. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to stop, to collapse, to rest. But he wasn't done. Doctor Strange didn't break eye contact. The single finger remained raised. This was it. One chance. Tony clenched his jaw and moved. His steps were heavy, his armor barely holding together, but he launched himself forward, barely making it to Thanos, as he was easily struck and flung away. Thanos raised the gauntlet. The power of the Infinity Stones surged, their light blinding, their force absolute. The Titan's expression was calm, resolute. He curled his fingers into a fist. I am inevitable. He snapped. Silence. Nothing. Thanos' brows furrowed. His head snapped back towards the gauntlet, confusion flashing across his face. The stones were gone. A flicker of movement. Tony. The nanites in his suit shifted, forming and reforming at the speed of light. The Infinity Stones pulsed within his fingers. Thanos' expression twisted from confusion to rage. Tony inhaled sharply. His body was barely holding on, his skin burning from the inside out. The power of the stones was already tearing through him. But his grip didn't falter. His lips parted, and through his voice was weak. His words were unshakable. I am Iron Man. He snapped his fingers. A shockwave of energy exploded outward. The battlefield rippled, a surge of golden light consuming everything in its wake. Thanos staggered. His army crumbled into dust. The warships overhead collapsed into themselves, fading into nothingness. His great war, the grand destiny he had shaped with his own hands, was erased before his very eyes. And then, his fingers turned into ash. Thanos stiffened. He stared at his own hand as the dust spread up his arm, over his shoulder, down to his chest. His breath was shallow, his jaw tight with resistance. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The war was his to win. He had sacrificed everything. He had endured. He had suffered. And yet, his vision blurred. His legs buckled. His strength failed. The Infinity Gauntlet lay before him, discarded. Useless. He reached for it, his last desperate grasp for control. But his fingers crumbled before they could touch it. His entire body trembled as the decay spread. He lifted his head one last time, his teeth clenched. Even now, even in death, he refused to surrender. The dust crept up on his face. His breath shuddered. His eyes flickered red. Scarlet Witch's vengeance lingered in his final moments. His form faded, piece by piece. And then, Thanos was gone. No second chances, no final words. The Mad Titan had finally fallen. And that, my friends, is my official twist on the Endgame story. This, honestly, doesn't really feel right because I'm interrupting at such like a grand moment, but the rest of the story was perfect. The rest of the story will unfold just as it did in Endgame. I thought Tony's death, everyone saying goodbye, his final moment with Pepper, the funeral, and especially Captain America's ending, I thought it was all perfect. I didn't think that I could actually possibly make that better. Like, what am I going to do? Introduce Morgan? Didn't fit right, okay? Now, of course, with different twists we had in this rewrite, some things would shift around, like I just mentioned. Morgan would still be around, she'd be present. Sam would obviously be getting the shield, but I honestly don't think they really need to be expanded on all that much. I was particularly excited for the part about the Stole World. This entire rewrite was actually inspired by a thought that I had because I was watching a YouTuber named Unique Namosaurus I watched his rewrite to Endgame, and I thought it was beyond brilliant, okay? In his rewrite, he actually came up with the idea for a soul for a soul. It was then, I was listening to his story at work, and it was so good. That's when I had the idea for his story, and built everything that you just saw over here around that initial idea. If you want to watch his rewrite, please do. I will link it in the pinned comment description down below, because, again, I can't thank him enough for this inspiration. The idea for the Soul Stone is there, and I don't want to spoil what he did, but I looked at that, and I was like, I think it would have been cool if you actually kind of went this way with it. And then I had the idea for, like, how can we make this brutal? And I actually came up with Tony and Peter fighting. I was a little bit unhappy with Peter kind of coming out of nowhere, but what was I supposed to do? Like, he was completely snapped away. I guess we could have kept him in, but I would have to change Infinity War. I didn't want to do that. I thought I did my best. Now, there was one thing that I actually thought of as I was closing up my rewrite. I don't know if I explained Thanos' initial presence all that well, and it kind of sucks because I'm talking about it right now, but I wanted to have, like, some unstable reaction with the stones, because Thanos lost the gauntlet. The stones popped out like there was a giant blast, and that's why Loki was able to control Thanos, because Thanos was actually weakened. The stones didn't want to collide with copies of stones from other realities, so I thought, like, the idea of them malfunctioning would fit very well. That's the only hiccup I kind of see in my story here, is I don't think I explained that part very well, but regardless, hopefully it was still enjoyable. Throughout this, I ended up pausing to tell you my thought process with each step, but I did want this finale to remain uninterrupted, and that's why I'm, like, feeling weird about ending it on, like, such a climactic moment, right? I wanted things to have proper payoffs, like Bucky having a redemption. I thought that was I hate saying it, but I think it was a fantastic idea. After everything that happened in Civil War, he's the one that sacrifices himself to save Stark's daughter. Scarlet Witch still being with Thanos as he finally faded away. Could you imagine getting that touch? She got a revenge. I wanted Loki to have a big moment. I thought that he was really, really underused, and I wanted him to have a redemption story. And the all that for a drop of blood thing. I was convinced. My dad and I watched Infinity War and was convinced that was going to mean something in Endgame. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So I wanted to include that in some way, but we ended up having him use the time stone again. I just thought it was like, it would have made for a pretty cool moment, to be honest with you. The only thing is, I know I mentioned Loki. The reason I wanted him to have such a big part is because I was actually excited to see him in Endgame, because I was convinced that Loki actually was the Hulk. I've been like, not bragging, like, convincing my friends in the entire lead up to Endgame, like, there's no reason for the Hulk to not be, like, there's no reason for him to not want to come out. It's Loki. It's Loki. He's playing a trick. So I wanted to have him play a good card. I really like the character of Loki. I have no idea how long this rewrite ended up being. I don't know if you noticed, I've changed clothes a few times as I was writing this, or reading this, excuse me. It's probably very long. My voice is just completely gone. This is by far the hardest I've ever worked on a video. If you've made it this far, thank you very, very much. Honestly, your time is extremely valuable. I appreciate you spending it over here. Please comment down below if there's anything that you would like to tweak, if any way that you could see this, like, any idea that I had, maybe make it better, or hey, I don't know if I don't really like that you went this way with it. Please comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Again, go check out the video in the pinned comment description down below with the other rewrite to Avengers Endgame, but we did make a reaction video a little while ago talking about whether or not Endgame actually was good or bad. I'd love for you to check out this video right here. More rewrites will be coming onto the channel, although it'll probably be a little bit slow, so stay tuned, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.